Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
For Emma, meeting Thomas had been a certain salvation. A dark, empty hole had been growing in her soul until then. The girl from the golden youth had never been denied anything. Her mother, a former Miss Beauty, cared only about not losing the attention of men, which made her run to fitness gyms, fancy salons and beauticians. She had little interest in her daughter. The father was much older than the mother, calm, attentive and so native, but all the time was at work. He paid attention, but it was not enough. And sometimes it even seemed that in his work he was hiding from some of life's problems. Emma always dressed better and had more expensive things. Teachers were a little afraid of her. For this she was disliked by her classmates. At university, studying became a lifesaver. She liked everything around her. New friends and girlfriends appeared. First love, which was bitter and destructive. Fell in love with the most spectacularly handsome man, who was so good that it seemed that next to this guy just turned off the brain. Realized he was from a very wealthy, powerful family. He did not love anyone but himself. To all his ex-girlfriends treated condescendingly and arrogantly. He made fun of them behind their backs. And it was at that moment, when she heard him discussing his ex-girlfriend, calling her unflattering words, that she should have stopped and realized that she would become the next one. But she couldn't resist the animal passion that was pushing her into this relationship. Emma had always been noted for her intelligence and wit. Looking at her mother, who had only brands in her head, Emma tried to be completely different. She studied on her own. Finished school without a medal, but excellent. At university, she immersed herself in her studies. She wanted to break stereotypes, to be not only beautiful, but also smart. The first handsome man of the university noticed her and made another. If Emma fell in love with him with all her heart and soul, opened her welcoming arms to him, gave him her purity and innocence, then for him she became the next tick. As soon as he played with her, he just stopped communicating. I tried to meet him, call him, but he didn't respond. One day I saw him outside the university from a window. I jumped out and saw him hugging his classmate. I realized it. Her subconscious was screaming at her to leave and not make a scene to keep her dignity. But her emotions overwhelmed her. She approached, asked, and was confronted with a myriad of unpleasant words and taunts. Her heart bled. Her soul emptied. After that came the emptiness. I couldn't get in the mood to study again. It seemed like I couldn't breathe. One day, walking through the park in some inner torpor, in the complete absence of awareness of the surrounding objective reality, sat on a bench. There were trees all around, calmness, the smell of pine trees, which I inhaled with incredible pleasure. My soul was empty. There was pain in my heart. It hurt even from the fact that I could not tell anyone anything. I didn't want to give my friends a reason to gossip. You couldn't tell your father. What about her mother? Emma sank into her thoughts. Everything she held inside her seemed to be destroying her from the inside out. She hadn't slept much lately. Nothing interested her. She wanted to forget everything and start over, but she couldn't. "You look very sad," came a voice. Emma nearly jumped up on the bench in surprise. Turning around, she saw a good-looking man of about 25 who was staring at her intently with a slight open smile. For some reason, his appearance was trustworthy. Although Emma had always been abrupt, this time she decided to just ignore him, turning away. She felt like crying. "There's no need to be sad. You're so beautiful." "You'll be fine," he said in a very soft, gentle, confident voice that was soothing. Then, immediately turned away, seeing that she didn't want to talk. Thomas sighed sadly. He had never met a girl like this. But walking down the street and seeing her on the bench, he couldn't pass her by. So delicate, refined, exquisite, but with sad, empty eyes. He knew that look, a look of hopelessness and indifference. What was her problem? Beautiful, dressed quite expensively. So everything can be changed. Why the incredible sadness? He wanted to do something to help. What could he do? But sometimes a couple of kind words can help a person to stand on his feet and overcome internal problems. After all, it is through talking that psychologists help people. "Yes, I'm not having much fun. But that doesn't concern you. Mind your own business," Emma finally said, looking at him with a cold stare. "Yeah, that's right. No offense taken. Just wanted to help." He smiled pleasantly and friendly. Emma didn't see a handsome enough athletic guy in front of her, probably looking for another victim like her ex. All men are the same. The unbearable pain in her soul reappeared. "I don't meet on the street, so don't try. It won't work," Emma said with a slight distaste in her voice and turned away. "Sorry, just wanted to help in any way I could." He stood up, picked up his wand that was lying next to him, and walked slowly, leaning on it. Looking after him, Emma felt embarrassed. She felt a little uncomfortable. This guy, despite the fact that he was handicapped himself, tried to support her. She stood up and caught up with him. "Oh, I'm sorry. Let's take a walk together," she smiled, and he smiled back at her. From that point on, they met almost daily. At first, a strong friendship developed between them. Trusting each other was helpful and supportive. Ethan was brought up in an orphanage, had a disability, received an apartment from the state. to which Emma came often enough. She helped him to clean, do laundry, buy groceries. Despite his disability, he worked on the internet all the time. Took on any job, even difficult ones. I'm trying, Emma, I still have a balcony to make. See? I've mastered the repairs, just a little bit left. And even get married. And they laughed. But Emma truly admired him. So strong. He practiced every day at home on the bar and had an attractive, beautiful, pumped-up body. Their friendship had become a real salvation for her. Even the anger and hatred she felt for her ex just went away. It was like she was cleansed of all the negativity. Cleansed and free. She realized that when you overcome such moments, you become stronger, wiser. And if it hadn't happened to her, maybe she never would have met Thomas. And he had become such a dear, close, best friend to whom she could tell everything. You have a crazy, cozy place here. When I come to you, I feel like I'm finally home. Where there's a welcome, where it's warm, she said dreamily. I'm glad. I looked at her with a certain sadness. With a mad love for this life, he was philosophical, realized that it was hard for the poor to get by. He knew that physical limitations took their toll on life. But despite this, he aspired and dreamed. I knew that anything was possible, if you wanted it badly enough. As soon as he saw Emma on the bench, he immediately realized that she was perfect, that his heart beat harder. But there was no chance. And even now, when they had become best friends, he realized that he couldn't give her anything good. She came from a rich family. A girl who was everything one could dream of. And what was he? He's nothing. Just a small cog in the capitalist machine. His life, his destiny, is a game of cards. If you're lucky, you'll be happy. If you're unlucky, nothing will help you build your world. What are you thinking? Emma looked at him very carefully. I guess about loving you, but having nothing to give along with my love. Only care. I decided to tell the truth for some reason. Emma raised her eyebrows in surprise, but she had actually guessed and known for a long time that Thomas loved her. She probably felt something for him too, but there was a limiter inside that warned her not to make any hasty decisions. She had skillfully reduced this conversation to friendly love, but she realized that it was about something more sublime. She had not yet fully realized her feelings, but she felt incredibly comfortable with him. She could confide all her secrets. She consulted him, and often stayed with him. But most importantly, he had never, until that day, hinted at bed or any personal relationship. Everything was somehow sincere, pure, and incredibly open. I guess that's what true love is. There was no crazy passion, which is replaced by pain and disappointment. There was stability, openness, complete trust. Before leaving for home, Emma looked at him one more time. Amazing, so gentle and beautiful, insanely red, like a carrot, hair, mustache, eyelashes, and green eyes, kind and bottomless. And so smiling, so unusual in these modern times. If he had been born a woman, he'd be worthless with such looks. Born unknown where and brought up by the state, he was immersed in a world of temptations, where he could only exist. Incredibly strong, despite his disability. Something wrong with his leg. He had hoped for recovery, as an expensive operation could make him whole, but there was no real possibility. The guy was not discouraged, struggled and lived. He created his cozy corner in the hope that someday he would bring his beloved here. Courageous. Though he spent most of his time at the computer, he did something, learned programming. He started every morning with exercise. There was no passion between them, but there was something stronger. Emma decided to celebrate her birthday at his place, setting the table and spending this holiday for the first time with a person who was truly dear to her. Every year until her 4th year, she had traveled home on this day. Her father would throw a grand party, trying to please his princess once again, and this was the first time she would celebrate her birthday outside of the house, and she was so happy. Even though there were no gourmet delicacies and champagne, it was him, so dear and sweet. It was the same day they became intimate as man and woman, and it was on that day that Emma realized that passion is just a moment of lust, but love. It is a feeling that builds up gradually, bringing it to a climax of fantastic and unrivaled emotion. When Thomas fell asleep, she got up and went to the kitchen. It seemed that everything in this small, modest apartment was dear and beloved. She came back and lay next to him, breathing in the scent of the man she loved. That day she realized they were made for each other. Every day the feelings of lovers grew stronger. The semester is ending soon. I'm going home, Emma said with obvious bitterness in her voice. Well, your parents miss you too. That's right, it was hard for him to let her go. But his father and mother were the most precious things on earth. He had always dreamed of a complete family, dreamed of being understood, loved and pitied. Are you going to stay here? I'll miss you. Her eyes were wet. Stop it. There's a phone, we'll chat. Go, enjoy being with your family. You'll be my family soon enough.
She was sure of it. Maybe you're still young. As you decide, so be it. He never tried to limit her will, loved her madly, but realized she had many perspectives. Right now was now. And then things could change. He couldn't give her wealth. Iva's used to it.
Once everyday life starts to weigh on her, things could change dramatically. He looked at her and couldn't stop admiring her. Delicate, refined facial features, big eyes, small waves in her well-groomed hair. She was always wearing different rings, beautiful, expensive, luxurious bags, gorgeous and well-groomed. If he couldn't give a tenth of what she had now, How would their relationship change? What are you thinking? It was as if she was reading his thoughts and staring inquisitively, trying to guess the future. He lowered his eyes. Everything will be fine. The girl knew exactly what he was thinking. Their future would not be easy. It would be hard to give up everything she had previously thought she needed. But expensive things, cosmetics, jewelry, that wasn't happiness, not life. She'll never be like her mother. An indifferent, unfeeling father, William Sergeyevich, a respected businessman who was rarely at home and saw no emotion from his wife. The mother was indifferent to anything that didn't have a famous brand on it. The father was only a source of money. However, the man did not suffer from this at all. There was an unspoken agreement between them. He, rich, Ava, beautiful. At events, they turned into a couple in love, played masterfully, and at home just split into different rooms. No scandals, no emotions. A family arrangement even sounds awful. Remembering all this, Emma cringed. Maybe not to go, but she missed her father a lot. I have a wonderful dad. Ava looked at Thomas. I'll be sure to introduce you to. Of course, the boy smiled. I'm going to miss you. So call and write more often, deal. Emma couldn't sleep for a long time. I wanted to go home, sort of. She missed her father very much. She hadn't seen him much before, but he had always been a true friend to her. So she knew he would understand and say, do it. And now she had a loved one who was even closer than her dad. How would her father feel about her chosen one? They had never talked about this future. They never discussed her marriage. But he probably wouldn't be happy about a son-in-law with no family, no money, no tribe. Her father was her friend, but he was a hard and harsh man. So it was hard to imagine his reaction. He should have been prepared for it. Ava didn't want to leave Thomas. She needed to be there for him. With some inner sense, she knew that he was always on the verge of fighting for life and wanting to die, even though outwardly he was incredibly positive, strong and determined. Ava knew that wasn't always the case. At night, often stroking his hands, she noticed the streaks of scars. Some were very old, others more recent. How many times had this man, who had no goals, no family, and knew no love, picked up a blade, lay down in a hot bath, and slashed the past, trying to rid himself of the feeling of being unwanted and reconnect with the universe? Why did this man feel like a stranger in life? A lot of things became clear to her after seeing those scars. There was no meaning in his life. He was inventing it himself to continue his journey, and to know himself, to make repairs, to master programming, to finish a project. Is it okay to leave him for a whole month? Yes, you can. He loves, he will wait. Everything will be fine. Everything will be exactly as it should be. He's responsible not only for his own life, but for hers. So he's not likely to do anything stupid. In the morning, Thomas just walked her out, trying not to think about being alone again. When you left him, his mother had just brought him to the orphanage, and then had her parental rights terminated. He tried to find her, searched through every thread he could find, but he didn't. He was about 7 or 8 years old when his mother brought him in and gave him away herself. I remember her fiery red hair, her green fox eyes, the huge scar on her left cheek, eyes full of grief and hopelessness. She told him then that she loved him, but she couldn't be a good mother to him. Said that because of her he was now disabled, and because of her he had no chance for a future. Maybe life will be gracious and you can accomplish a lot. Maybe someone will take you in and you'll have a future. But not with me. Large tears flowed from his mother Alice's eyes as he saw that picture again now. Beautiful, bright, but exhausted and unhappy mom. I'll work, we'll get through this. I'll always be there for you. He didn't understand much at the time, but he knew for sure that he wanted to be by her side. Loved his mother with all his heart. She's good, son, remember me. Wiping her tears and nose, she removed from her neck a very thin chain with a small pendant like a daisy. You don't give the 8 to anyone. It has your picture and mine on it. It was a gift from your grandmother. I've done so many stupid things. I have no place on this earth. I love you. Remember that always. Always have and always will, mommy. He snuggled into her with his whole body, smelling the warm scent of steaming milk and inexpensive perfume with hints of pine scent. It was as if he could smell it now. Mommy, all these thoughts brought an indescribable sadness to him. My darling, I'll be back soon. Emma didn't love her chosen one. She wanted to take him with her, but realized it was premature. Okay, call more often. He hugged her again as he inhaled the scent of her as a child. The scent of the woman he loved. The smell was incredibly delicate and pleasant, delightful. He could smell the light notes of lilac. It seemed that the scent of the woman she loved had completely displaced the scent of her beloved mother from her memory. On arriving home, Emma met her mother at once. My goodness, my dear, her mother rushed to hug and kiss her. Grown up in these 6 months. Pretty girl, she began to consider Emma mommy. She snuggled up to her, but felt a certain detachment. Honey, do you remember my dress? She adjusted her yellow, impossibly gorgeous outfit. Tell me how you are. Olivia looked at her daughter and saw a small, pale copy of herself, seemingly not bad looking, but gray. That's what she was. Need to buy her a good groom, like she bought any toys she wanted. It's okay, Mom. The session's over. Everything's great, daughter. Put the coffee machine on. Do you want coffee? That's not good for you. I only drink fresh juice. Somewhat dismissively, she looked at her. Don't you go to the hairdresser? It always amazed Emma that her mother somehow didn't care about her emotions or spiritual state. The only thing Olivia cared about was appearance and beauty, and now her own daughter, who hadn't been around for more than 6 months, whose eyes were shining with mad love, was getting attention only in the matter of her hair. It became even somehow unpleasant. Of course, it's important. A woman must always remain beautiful, well-groomed, gorgeous. Otherwise, men won't love her. Olivia looked proudly at her reflection in the huge refrigerator. "Does your father love you?" her daughter asked with a challenge. "Probably not loves, but appreciates and respects," the mother said with a little sadness in her voice. "Love, my dear, is not the most important thing in a relationship." Have you ever loved? Emma actually wondered. Her mother was so cold. Had she ever had love? Loved. She sat down at the table. "Let's have coffee," and became sort of sad. "If you don't want to, don't tell me." Emma felt some pain in her mother's soul, and immediately felt sorry for her. "I loved your father, loved William with all my heart. He was so attentive and charming, so beautifully courted. Loved him, was just like you. Naive, pure, not without the fact that you wouldn't date a poor man. But it wasn't just the money. He wasn't as rich then, somewhat wealthy." Emma placed a nice, small cup and sugar bowl on the table. She tried to make the atmosphere more pleasant. "No, thank you." "Okay," and with sugar the girl placed her cup on the table and began stirring. "Your father was so well looked after. I fell in love with him. And he never loved me. He had a once-in-a-lifetime love, some hippie. He still has a picture of her." The mother sighed sadly again. "I found out when I was pregnant with you. I thought, oh, it's no big deal. I'll be able to break him. He'll love me. I was smart. You won't believe it, I learned to be an actress, never crossed him, and he pretended to love me. But then he started to drift away." "Mom, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to." The daughter didn't want to rake up the past. "Oh no, I'll tell you. He stopped coming into my bedroom, and at night he sat in the study until morning. I came in once, and he was sleeping on the desk where her pictures were. We haven't lived as husband and wife for a long time. That's the only joy, shopping, beauty, and all that." Just like that, things became obvious to Emma. They had really just become indifferent to everything. It was all her father's fault. It was horrible to imagine that her mother loved him sincerely and honestly, as she loved no one. For the first time, her daughter saw her with tears in her eyes, sincere tears. The father loved too, but another. How scary is it to live and know that your loved one doesn't respond to you, doesn't love you, doesn't appreciate you, just uses you as a social element? Emma immediately thought of Thomas. Honey, how much did she miss him? But why won't you leave your father? You're a pretty girl. You'll find love, she thought. She felt genuinely sorry for her mother. "You may not believe me, but I still love him. I pretend to be indifferent on purpose. But I do, Emma. I still have hope in my heart." "Mommy, calm down," hugged her daughter. "Talk to him." "No, and you don't say anything to him." Emma had always thought all family problems were because people didn't know how to be honest with each other. It doesn't make sense. I've put up with it a long time ago, and it's unlikely to change. Olivia was open and frank for the first time in the last 20 years. All this time she's been playing her role, carefree, infatuated only with appearances. It had once been a game, but over time it had become routine. Perhaps. But I think it's still worth talking. Emma said what she thought. She realized that openness and honesty could be an aid in any endeavor. She saw that her mother genuinely loved her father, so she thought that attitude could be resuscitated. Olivia was greatly distressed by the memories, so Emma did not begin to tell about the difficulty she had with her favorite person. Emma wanted to start living with Thomas, but she realized that it was important to talk to her father about the relationship. She needed to get his blessing, and doing that wasn't going to be as easy as it seemed. Her father seemed to always be on her side, but in reality, if she told him about Thomas's disability and the fact that he was from an orphanage, there was a good chance her father wouldn't accept her choice, and that wasn't even what scared her. She realized that she could finish her studies, and then she could work full-time and cope with any difficulties. She didn't count on her father's money, but she was afraid that he'd start putting sticks in her wheels, and that it might hurt Thomas. Emma wanted to make him happy, and in no way wanted to be a source of trouble for him. Her father returned from work in the evening. "My princess, it's so good to see you." The emotional connection with his daughter was very great. No one in his life he loved as much as he loved her. He was anxious that the little girl's future should be cloudless. That's why he worked and tried to put things off for her sake. "Daddy," she threw herself around his neck and sank into a soft but confident embrace.
"It's so good of you to come. Why didn't you say it was today? I would have met you." "You didn't say anything." Her father shifted his eyebrows theatrically and gave her a stern look.
"I wanted to surprise you." His daughter looked at him with eyes full of delight. Dad always knew how to look gorgeous. Now Emma realized that he must have had a million girls running after him, and he didn't like his mother. I wonder what was the one he loved, the one who had conquered his mind for years. Or maybe Mom is wrong, and he just holds some resentment in his soul. That's why they don't have a real family, but only a semblance. "Surprised mother," I saw, he said with a certain monotony. Yes, she and I have already had coffee. And how are you? You look gorgeous, but your eyes are sad. Emma had always been able by some subconscious, inexplicable instinct to see his troubles. Now outwardly he seemed calm, but the unrest was inside him. Yes, some difficulties at work. But that's all minor stuff as usual. How are your studies and peaceful conversations? They met the evening. Then the family sat down to dinner. Everything was the same as always, perfect, as if her parents had rehearsed dinner or breakfast in the evenings. No bickering, no complaints. Artificial smiles. Honey darling, just like in the best movies. And if an outsider got here at this ordinary table with dinner, he would probably think that in front of him the perfect family. And only Emma knew it was a game. Now she found out that her mother was not a soulless doll, but a normal and adequate woman, who from her inner pain and disappointment in love simply put on a mask. For several days Emma did not dare to talk to her father. The situation irritated her. She had no doubt that she loved Thomas and wanted to be with him. In the evenings they would text for hours about absolutely nothing. She tried to be supportive of the guy, as she was afraid that loneliness might play tricks on him again. Honey, I want to talk to my dad about us, but I don't dare. She tried to make her voice carefree, as if by the way. That's okay, you'll talk some other time. Thomas somehow completely failed to understand her doubts and anxiety. I was thinking of moving in with you starting next semester. Is that okay with you? They had talked to him more than once about it, and while last time she had told herself that she needed to think about it some more, today Emma was certain that she wanted to move in with Thomas and as soon as possible. Sure, move in. His voice trailed off. The guy adored Emma. She had become the center of the universe for him and his whole life. He wanted to live for her, to create, to build, to create. He wanted to do something beyond his abilities, just to live and breathe the air she breathed. For the first time in my life, I felt happy again. Every time he looked at himself in the mirror, he thought about the fact that his mother had left him because of his looks, unattractive, because of his leg unreliable and for disobedience incapable. He tortured himself with many doubts and torments. When Emma appeared in his life, everything became completely different. He stopped thinking about his mother, stopped thinking about the past. He opened the door to the present and the future. Every evening the girl called him, telling him how her day was, and he spent all day working on an old chair in the garage for his refined and aristocratic beloved. Emma had once expressed a genuine delight in important things. Thomas, on the other hand, remembered an old chair in his garage that could be restored. The old thing was slowly being transformed. It was a lot of work, but in a month his beloved would arrive, and it would be the best present ever. Time flew by, but anxious thoughts still visited him. He imagined that she wouldn't tell her father everything, and he wouldn't let her come here, wouldn't let her go to him. It was quite possible. What then? Why should he live? No, he'll be happy. He'll have a big family, he'll be strong. He'll always be strong. That's what Emma taught him. The girl was getting ready for the big talk. The father stayed home for the weekend. Her mother had gone for another treatment, and Emma and her father decided to have lunch together. It was business as usual, homey and cozy. Martha, their faithful housekeeper and cook, set everything up. Martha, you may be dismissed. Get some rest, I'll take care of Daddy, Emma said, smiling at her favorite housekeeper who had always been like a grandmother to her. Okay, dear. William, can I go now? She interjected to her host. Of course you can. Since the daughter wants to nurse her father, so be it, he smiled. Enjoy your meal then. Martha checked everything on the table in a sedate manner and left. Meanwhile, Emma and her father were enjoying a delicious and flavorful stew. As soon as the housekeeper left, Emma decided to start a conversation. Dad, tell me, have you ever loved anyone really hard? She tried to speak casually. Sure, a shadow of sadness ran across his face. You don't have to go on if you want to. Ava hoped that he, like her mother, would be frank with her. Why this conversation? He looked at her carefully and shrewdly. I've fallen in love, she paused. Good, and who's the lucky guy? It was amazing. His little princess had grown up. Her father looked at her carefully, all grown up. He would have to part with her, would live in another house. Well, I'll introduce you, of course. Then I faced betrayal, and he supported me, became my best friend, then my favorite person. I can't imagine now how I lived without him. Thomas is a wonderful man. Ava spoke at length, telling everything in the best colors. But most importantly, she kept silent about her lover's disability and lack of a steady job. Her father looked at her sternly, but her words touched his soul. He remembered his only love, a beautiful girl with red hair, bright eyes and gentle hands. Can you hear me? Ava noticed her father's thoughts were somewhere far away. Remembering your life. You tell it all so romantically, it brought back memories of my love. He lowered his eyes as if there were tears in them. You knew the answer about your mom, but you wanted to hear the story from him. Your mom I have a lot of respect for. She's perfect, but I love someone else so much he decided to answer his daughter with honesty upon honesty. And who was that? The girl endeavored to make an interested look. As soon as I started in business, I met her. She was very pretty. But what attracted me to her was another thing. She's lively, so free in everything. We started dating. I found out she already had a child, but it didn't scare me. It was so romantic. She was special. But as soon as I asked her to move in with me, she ran away. I looked for her afterward. But everything, he stood up and pulled out a bottle. You want some good wine? Go ahead, she didn't feel like wine. Ava wanted to talk, to make her father softer. Then maybe it would be okay to talk about everything. Heard a lot about her, but no facts. None again, the father's heavy sigh. You never saw each other again. No, met your mom a year later. Got married, but it's hard to forget that one. Life was kind of bright with her, different. As soon as she left, there was an emptiness and the colors faded. He drank the wine in a gulp. Clearly, his mother was right that his father did not love her, but tortured her. Do you know when the colors came back into my life? He looked questioningly at his daughter. When you were born, you became my salvation and life became bright. That's how Mom and I live. Everything is going well for us. Now you have such opportunities. Don't you want to find your love? It was really incomprehensible to her daughter why her parents were not separating but tormenting each other. No, not anymore. I have a family, the father said confidently. But a family is not a sentence. Why are you tormenting Mom? She looked at him with eyes full of hatred. Yes, your mother is well off. Never thinks about anything but money. Though I think she once loved me, my father almost shouted. Loved and loves, Emma jumped up. She's become like that because of you. The one who loved so much. Dedicated poems to you. He drank the wine again in a gulp. What makes you think your mother doesn't love you? Emma, he toned it down a little. I don't. It just seemed that way to me. Mom told me herself that she did and does. I knew you loved another and suffered, Emma stammered. After all, she had promised her mother not to tell. Her voice trembled. Her father looked at her very carefully. Interesting. You surprised me. I thought she was indifferent. He hesitated. After this conversation, father remembered the past. He remembered the one who had made him unhappy, a love with which he had no equal. She didn't conquer him with her beauty, but with something else. She wrote him poems. They mesmerized him, spoke of true love, but she was a free spirit. She didn't want to be dependent. He lied to his daughter. He didn't tell the truth. They lived together. She had a baby boy. He wanted to adopt him. He was willing to work 24 hours a day for her, and she needed attention. She often went out without saying where, and often left the baby unattended. He'd freak out and scream, and she'd sit and watch him. At first there was a mad passion. They did whatever they wanted. He'd run his errands and get home to her. Then he started spending more time at work. She started going out without him, and he got jealous. One day he saw her with someone else. They were just standing there talking. But when they came home, William was in a frenzy, insulted, humiliated, threatened to take the child away. After that, in the morning she was gone. No belongings were gone, leaving a broken heart. He looked for her. She, on the other hand, was living with another man who demanded nothing of her, but was incredibly abusive. Beale, she ran away. Where to? Unknown. I looked for her for a long time, but no luck. I wanted to prove to myself and to her, if she came back, that she'd made a mistake. So he got married. Olivia was refined, delicate, vulnerable, but later on, she showed herself to be something else entirely. She became more defiant. I remembered the moment that was the turning point in their lives. After giving birth, she walked into the office where he was. Who is this woman, William? She looked up with eyes full of tears. The woman you love, he said defiantly. What about me? The consort looked on with sadness and hope. What about you? Isn't money enough for you? What? Do you lack Miss Beauty? He did not believe in her love. Never, do you hear? Never will you be loved by me again. Money. Money it is. And she walked away with her head held high. Always perfect in public, she created the image of the perfect family. He was surprised. This evening had come as a surprise to him. The baby daughter who had kept the fire of life burning in him was now an adult and would soon be married. Who was this man? Can he make Emma happy? Just questions. We should meet. He really hoped that his daughter's chosen one loves her and not the money she has. I mean, that happens a lot these days. He hoped that his daughter would be happy and not, like him, gaze expectantly at the women passing by, hoping to see the one. He pulled out some beautiful photographs. A red-haired girl was looking at him flirtatiously from a snapshot, then began to revisit the family photos. Olivia was everywhere in them, happy, a beautiful smile, the happiest possible image. He really thought his spouse was happy with the unlimited limit card she was using, and it turned out that she loved and suffered. Is this the case? If the wife has been agonizing all this time, living her story, then maybe it's not too late to change things. After all, once because of his pride, he had already lost the woman he loved. And Olivia, a friend of his 40 days, always uncomplaining, always there, ready to come to the rescue. Maybe he should try again. But now the first priority is to meet his daughter's fiancé. Emma said she would get together with him, try to live together. So it was necessary to get to know the future relative. Something inside him told him that his daughter wasn't telling him something, and clearly something was wrong. Hi, Olivia came from the office where he sat in his musings. I was wondering if we have any meetings or events next week. I need to plan everything. Every Sunday she came in asking these questions. Then she planned everything properly and efficiently. "No, Olivia," he looked at her extremely carefully. "Can you stay?" Alva gave him a surprised look, but stopped, shutting the door, gracefully walked to the couch and sat down. He stood up and walked over to her, sat down next to her. Did she really love him all these years, waiting for the attention he did not give her? They listened to him in a businesslike manner with complete indifference. "Do you know your daughter wants to get married?" she asked her husband. She said she was in love, but to get married, Ava was actually surprised. "Yeah, wants to live together with him from next semester." He moved even closer. "What do you think?" "I think if she loves him, let her try. If it's love, they'll live, no matter what, and if not, everyday life will divorce them quickly." Ava spoke still as wisely. God, she's so beautiful. Steady, wise, he thought. Why had he never looked at her as a real woman? Always, from day one, thought she was mercantile, because she was just convenient. And now his daughter had suddenly opened his eyes. What did this woman do? Why had he tormented her for years, neglecting her and replacing it with money? It wasn't Ava's fault that he'd lost his first love, and then made up his own misery, making her suffer as well. He didn't know how he should start the conversation. Yes, it was all amazing. With her husband, everything was always discussed dryly and specifically, like in the office. "Do you believe she's in love? Maybe I do." Ava looked at him with eyes full of wonder. "You love me?" he asked in almost a whisper. Olivia was even more surprised, staring and not understanding. "Love me?" Ava lowered her eyes. Now the man was looking penetrating. Olivia lowered her head and looked away. With a gentle movement, he turned her toward him and looked into her eyes. "Yes, but I realized it all back when you said you loved, and would love someone else all the time." Her voice filled with tears. "My dear, let's try it all over again." He pulled her to him and hugged her. Why, she didn't understand the change that had taken place with her husband. Their relationship had been completely different since that day. It was as if the feelings had sharpened. They had really decided to start over. Or rather, not a new beginning, but a fresh start. Olivia had indeed become an incredibly happy woman. She had a man by her side who surrounded her with care and attention that she had never, in fact, known. When her daughter left, she was insanely happy for her parents, realizing that she had a hand in it. She knew that without her, they would not have started a new phase of their lives, would not have built new relationships. Her father promised that very soon he would come to meet his future son-in-law. Naturally, the one was not very much afraid, but at the same time, she realized that without this, it would be impossible to build a future with her chosen one. Emma was worried that there might be certain difficulties in the relationship between her father and Thomas. After all, they were so different. Father always knew exactly what he was aiming for. He was tough and demanding. And Thomas is completely different, soft, gentle, vulnerable. She felt sorry that these two completely different people would have to communicate. It might be difficult for them to build a relationship. Upon arriving in town, Emma went straight to Thomas. "I've missed you so much. I feel like it's been forever since I've seen you," she said as she hugged him and wouldn't let go. It really seemed to Emma that if she let him go, he would disappear somewhere. There was a calmness in her soul right now around this man. She truly loved him. It was hard without him. When she saw him, she just couldn't tear herself away, hugging and kissing the one person she wanted to be open and real with. "How was your trip?" He smiled gently, squeezing her tightly in his arms. It was great indeed. Her trip had yielded incredible results. Her parents had reconciled, or rather, simply grown closer together. The only thing she didn't want to talk about was talking to her father about how she never really told him anything good about Thomas. "That's fine then. Let's go see my present," he suggested. It was amazing how this man, who just 6 months ago had been a stranger and an outsider, sensed her mood subtly. She didn't want to talk about the conversation with her father, but he didn't ask. It was as if he had sensed it in his gut. Emma was well aware that he didn't have much money, and he wouldn't be able to satisfy all her wants and needs. She had decided long ago that she didn't need material possessions or expensive gifts. She only needs his pure and sincere love. Someone in this life strives for power and fame with the help of their parents' money, and she didn't need anything, just him by her side. "Are you spoiling me with something?" "Well, let's go see," she said, leaning on her wand. He took her hand and led her into the garage. He opened the door, and before her stood a magnificent vintage chair, luxurious, rare, beautifully restored. It was fantastic. She adored such things. It even seemed to her that the Queen's maid of honor had once sat in this chair. It was amazing how this man had accomplished such a miracle with his own hands. She had told him a long time ago that she liked this kind of thing. She used to dream that when she had her own house, she would buy a huge number of such things. And then she met Thomas and realized that a lot of the things she used to dream about would never come true. I didn't want to say anything to him about money. She knew he couldn't fulfill all her desires, so she decided not to make him feel inferior. And now she realized very clearly that this close and dear person felt her very subtly. Even without much money, he was trying to realize her dreams. The chair was delightful. She threw herself on his neck, hugging him and shedding tears, and he laughed. realized they were tears of happiness. He didn't ask stupid and unnecessary questions. He just smiled, hugged her, and kissed her crying eyes. The days ran merrily and carefree. Emma realized that very soon she would become a specialist and go to work. They would be able to live a full and independent life. She told him that she was moving out, and a few days later she did indeed move in. They formed a small and dignified family. Everyone supported and understood each other. He even helped her write her notes. It was so tender and romantic that she was just thrilled. The only thing that scared her over and over again was that she never told him everything. Someday it would have to be done. One day there was a knock on the door. She opened it. On the doorstep was her father. She'd left the address with her mom just in case. Now she realized it was the wrong decision. She realized there was no other way her father could have done it. He just came unannounced, came to talk and see everything with his own eyes. There was no limit to the surprise and grief in her soul. The daughter was not ready for such a conversation, much less a meeting. Neither was Thomas. She was afraid that now Daddy might offend him and things would not go as she had planned. They'd been living so well, everything had been wonderful. And now it might all be ruined because of her father, who, not understanding the situation, would surely do something wrong. That would be a shame. Emma hoped for one thing, that Thomas would understand her and forgive her for Dad, yes, he loves, would understand that she couldn't have done otherwise. She couldn't have left the address, which meant this situation was inevitable. I understand. Are you surprised? But I decided to come and meet my son-in-law. Take a look at how you live here. Maybe you need some help. Without stopping, his father spoke. He understood that Emma was in a certain stupor, but at the same time he could not bear it any longer. Every day in his head lived the thought that he absolutely does not know to whom he gave his daughter, who is now engaged in her life and her well-being. So he made a decision for himself to go and figure it all out. Olivia had objected, of course, but he had always acted independently and decisively. Dad, we weren't expecting guests at all. We should have at least warned you, Emma said, banal, meaningless phrases. She realized there was nothing she could do to change it. It's no big deal. I bought everything to set the table, her father replied, and handed her a bag of groceries. Father went into the kitchen and looked around. He was stunned. Poverty, Khrushchevka with thin walls, complete lack of any comfort. In the kitchen, an old worn-out stove, no dishwasher. Just a nightmarish environment, impossible to describe in words. He even felt like a rat was about to run through somewhere. Not because it was dirty, but because it was old, shabby and poor. Dad went into the living room. How can you call it a living room? A hall with shabby old carpets that come from the Soviet Union. It's a wonder they're still there. Is this really where his daughter lives? You couldn't tell from looking at her that she was unhappy. Smiling, cheerful, fresh. What's going on here? It's so disgusting, so horrible, it's impossible. One room that acted as a living room and a bedroom. Everything here was kind of frozen in time, old cabinets, an intimidating couch. But in the center of this terrifying room was a gorgeous vintage armchair. It was probably the only element here that wasn't disgusting. Where's my future son-in-law? Dad tried to hold back the nausea that was coming over him. Went to the store, the daughter practically whispered as she saw the look in the man's eyes. Realized what he was thinking. Realized something terrible was about to happen. Saw the jowls begin to run on his cheeks, and a vein pulsed on his neck. She realized that he was about to explode, and with any luck he would explode before Thomas arrived, which meant there would be no scandal. But if she was unlucky, the scandal would erupt when the future son-in-law arrived. She was very afraid, but she was even more afraid of losing Thomas. Emma pulled herself together and looked at her father with a stern, even stern look. It suddenly seemed to her that she had become a small copy of him. She felt the jowls begin to run on her cheeks and the veins in her neck throbbing. Go away, just go away, her daughter said with a slight tear. It seemed as if she was about to start a scandal herself. Kick him out of here, scream and never want to speak to him again. Her father turned to her in surprise, not understanding how his little princess, delicate and refined, suddenly turned into a resident of a communal apartment, defending her square meters. Probably there would have been a serious scandal if the door hadn't opened and Thomas hadn't appeared on the doorstep. He looked at the stranger who stood next to his beloved and guessed that it was her father. He always understood everything without words. Good afternoon. And we have guests. He extended his hand to her father in a friendly manner. Emma was a little confused and introduced them to each other. Although her father turned pale, he shook hands with his future son-in-law, looking at him disdainfully and even disparagingly. Yes, handsome, athletic figure, but an invalid standing leaning on a stick. It was horrible. His beautiful daughter, who had a huge dowry and unlimited financial opportunities, now lives with a disabled person in this shabby Khrushchevka. The world must have gone mad. Perhaps he is just asleep and needs to pinch himself to wake up soon. Everything was so horrible to him that it seemed unreal. Emma sat her father down at a table in the hall and surreptitiously began setting the table, pulling out old Soviet plates and a crystal vase into which she poured the salad. It seemed as if he had gotten into a time machine and traveled back in time. As everyone sat down at the table and drank some wine, The father decided to have a final talk with his daughter. He realized that there was no point in procrastinating and he needed to dot the I's and cross the T's. He did not want to talk to Thomas. His father asked him where he worked and was told that on the computer meant nowhere. That finally convinced him that he needed to talk right now. His mind was screaming at him to stop. He realized that he could lose his daughter forever now, that his grievances were burning her soul and could plant a seed of hatred between father and daughter. But his temper and some inner demon were screaming, "That's it, say it. Get her out of here, make it right. Come on, let's go out to the kitchen," he practically hissed. "Okay," Emma replied without taking Thomas' hand. She could see that he had gone pale, sensing the approaching storm. "It's going to be okay. Honey, I love you," she said. In the kitchen, her father didn't even want to sit down on a stool. He looked at everything with eyes full of disgust. "What is all this, Emma? What is this?" He was no longer holding back his emotions and spoke quite loudly. "I don't know what you mean." His daughter turned away from him, trying to make her voice quieter, as if to motivate him to lower the volume too. "I mean, what is this all about? You live in this shabby little crusty apartment. There's no living space here, nothing to attract you. And this man, good looking. Yes, but he's handicapped. Do you realize that he makes absolutely no money? How are you going to live?" He hesitated more and more with each passing second. "Is that a man? Is this a man who lives in this squalid room and brought his favorite woman into it, too?" The walls were very thin in the Khrushchevka, so Thomas could hear absolutely everything. It was unpleasant, but he understood why her father was so upset and upset. He probably wouldn't be thrilled if he were him either, but he also realized that he was precious to Emma. He realized that money wasn't the most important thing in life. Not wanting to hear what was going on in the kitchen anymore, he started pacing the room, but it was impossible to get rid of the sounds. He wanted to come in and speak man to man, but he realized the pointlessness of it. Right now, it was better to just keep quiet. Then his father would be gone, and they would live peacefully again. Emma might not talk to her father for a while, but then they'd reconcile. Things will get better. Her father will eventually come to terms with the situation. Or maybe someday she herself will realize that her father was right and leave Thomas. With excitement and discomfort, he paced around the room, taking souvenirs from the shelf and rearranging his guitar, then decided to just play and sing so he couldn't hear what was going on in the kitchen. In essence, create a noise background. I ran my thin fingers over the guitar strings and sang. Dad turned pale. Emma even thought his lips trembled. As Thomas played and sang, her father changed before her eyes. Then he simply stormed into the living room. "How do you know that song?" he almost shouted. "My mother used to sing it to me," Thomas replied, surprised but confidently, not realizing what was going on. "So you're from the orphanage?" His father just seemed to be losing his mind. "And she gave me away when I was 7 or 8, the boy couldn't hide his surprise anymore. "What was her name?" Emma's father asked, taking a seat on the couch. "Alice." "Is she alive?" "I don't know." Just like that, fate gave him a chance to right the wrongs of his youth. This was the same baby he had once rocked in his arms, the son of his only beloved woman, the one he idolized, the one who made him happy. She had shown him a completely different, vibrant life. He looked at him and realized that the red hair and green eyes were just like hers. Now, more than ever, he realized that he had made a mistake. No need to meddle in his daughter's private life. They were happy, after all. Perhaps he would be just as happy with Alice. Together they would overcome all difficulties. But his stubbornness and desire to control everything changed everything. She left, and then wandered the world, having failed to raise her only child. And now, what he can do in memory of his former love for the woman who made him happy and, in fact, created him as he is now is to give his daughter and son the opportunity to be happy. When he heard the first lines of the song, he realized that they were the very poems he had written to her, the favorite poems he remembered all his life. From that moment on, William became more attentive to people and decided to spend more time at home with his wife. Appointed an executive director in his firm, his daughter and son-in-law, who very quickly won his heart with his kind disposition, gave him a house where everything was perfect, told the young ones of his love, talked a lot with Thomas about his mother, whom he hardly knew, showed the photos he had saved, which he then gave away. Emma and Thomas were building their carefree, happy future in their new home. His father paid for Thomas to have surgery to correct his chromosome and allowed him to run the company's website, which allowed him to attract additional clients. And Olivia found more than just a loved one who finally paid attention to her and showered her with love. Ava was preparing to become a mother again. Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, 2 pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. Don't go, Robert, it'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather, she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment, he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you? I'm starving. I'll never make it home, she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd. In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy, she just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that. Belle was taken aback. Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her? Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing. After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young. That was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner. Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance. Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him, and his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man, only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire. Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience. The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect? I think you misunderstood me. Robert removed her hand. I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it. The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the second shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken, and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatricians strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the 4 of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of 2 evils. Go to the sea with the 3 of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the 3 of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time, a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed, and he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, 2 parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed, "Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories?" Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. "Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything." He walked home and thought wistfully, nothing will come of this collaboration. she will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible. The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing, soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical. At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores, Jacqueline, to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop, to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital. But no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as." The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job. One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. "Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards. What kind of whimsy is that? Echoed him in the tone of a confused director. Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them. The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his. There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him in sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you, he said. To what do I owe? Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria. The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance, thought the director, and said aloud, would you agree to help us out? Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments. Do not chop from the shoulder, tried to press on the pity of the director. If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie. Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed and his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job as professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the bird's rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them? He was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home. Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher who works as a choirmaster unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten, and later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Katrin was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frightenedly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, and a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly. Can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling, Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension, so he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, "Madison, do you need my help or can I go?" There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. "You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that." Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place. Only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. "The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over," Robert said. "It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent." That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. "Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication." Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. "I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me, because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man." Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. "I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde." Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time, to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabal in the family, he said, laughing. Then the 3 of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, "Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family." Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. "It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. "My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups? It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it." Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life, my only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that, either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth. As long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that. But you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly, if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. "I love her more than life," Michael asked. "Let her go, she can still be happy." "I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects," Robert explained. "She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself." They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers. I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable, he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque, Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. They like you, Michael said. Who? Jennifer didn't understand. My parents, he explained. They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with. She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog, then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good. There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again, they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note. Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything. He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own, real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought, how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence? Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon. Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of a million men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes? She exclaimed. I'm the first to taste. She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days. What a tragedy, said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did.
Calm him down, yelled a disgruntled lady on the train. The father's reply made the whole carload of. When Selena was just about to leave the house with her husband Harvey, someone rang the doorbell. She did not hurry to open the door, as she is in a hurry to visit family friends. Time is very short. She has to stop by to buy presents. It seemed that the unexpected guest was not going to leave. The calls became more insistent. Selena ran to the door. peered through the peephole and exclaimed loudly, "Oh my God!" She hurried to open the door. In front of her stood her son Mickey. "Mom, I thought you weren't home." "Come in, son. Why are you like this?" "You should have warned me. Your father and I almost went to visit. Casey, come on in." "Mom, I'd like you to meet Casey, my wife. I told you about her. So we decided to surprise you and sign her ourselves." Mickey shocked his parents with his announcement. Selena thought for a moment, trying to remember when Mickey had talked about this Casey. He talked about a lot of girls, but Selena didn't remember much about Casey in particular. In front of her stood a short, full-figured girl with dyed hair and dark circles under her eyes. Selena wasn't particularly thrilled, but now was not the time to show it. Harvey, look who's here." Selena escorted her son and her daughter-in-law into the living room. Harvey, who had already spent an hour in front of the mirror trying to tie his tie, was overjoyed to see his son. "That's news. Mother, our son has a knack for surprises. If he'd been half an hour late, we'd have had to stand at the door until evening." "How are you, my son? Welcome home." Harvey greeted his son warmly, then looked questioningly at Casey, who was a little embarrassed, and said hello. "It's Walker's anniversary today. My mother and I are going to see them. Are you coming with us, or are you going to stay home and rest?" Harvey asked. "No, Dad. You go and have fun, and we'll get some rest at Casey," said Mickey. "Well, as you wish. The main thing is not to be bored here without us," said Selena, and hurried her husband. As soon as the married couple left the apartment and the door closed behind them, Selena said to her husband, "Have you seen, what's going on? Who the hell is this Casey girl? He says he told me about her, and I don't remember anything, but I don't like that girl. She don't even look like Mickey. Look at him. He's handsome, well-mannered, and this girl doesn't impress me." Selena started to grumble. "Mother, stop it. Mickey's a big boy. He can decide what he wants to do with his life. What's it to you and me? Let him live his life. Let him make his own choices. A girl's just a girl to me. I'm talking about you," Harvey said, and laughed. As the celebration at Walker's was drawing to a close, a tipsy Harvey made a toast. "It was a good holiday today. I want to continue it. You, Maria, and Alexander are celebrating 30 years of life together, and on the same day, we learned that a new cell of society has appeared in our circle. To be more precise, our Mickey brought a bride into the house. So in a week's time, we'll be expecting the same group of people at our house. Congratulations and wishes in honor of Maria and Alexander smoothly flowed to Selena and Harvey. The guests gladly accepted the proposal to celebrate the marriage of Mickey and Casey in a week in a small circle of friends. The next day, Selena's family had a closer encounter with Casey. Selena kept trying to convince herself that her vague doubts about Casey's unworthiness of her son were just her usual maternal reaction. She'd asked a lot of questions of Casey and was convinced that she was a typical girl, not a bad character, and Harvey had reassured her. A week later, the family was ready to welcome guests to the restaurant. Family friends were toasting and presenting their gifts. Mickey sat quietly in the corner of the table accepting congratulations, while Casey was off and back again. As the event neared the halfway point, Selena noticed that Casey was becoming quite talkative, and after a while, she let go of controlling her behavior. Now she was bravely telling obscene jokes and drinking with her father-in-law's friends. When Selena tried to admonish her, Harvey gestured that it was okay. Young, let them have fun. So what if she had a little too much to drink amidst the excitement, said Harvey. Amidst the excitement, and Cindy and Natalie will be saying tomorrow that Mickey brought some alcoholic into the house, and they'll be right. A girl's got to know how to behave in public. I don't think anyone taught that girl how to behave in public, Selena hissed. When the guests were leaving, Casey couldn't stand on her own. Mickey tried to take her home as fast as he could, but she resented him for some reason and made her own complaints. All of this was happening in front of her parents. Selena could barely contain her emotions. The next day, Selena got up early as usual to make breakfast for the whole family. She went to the refrigerator, clearly unable to say hello to her mother-in-law, opened the door, found nothing for her hangover, and closed it again with a clatter. "Casey, is something wrong?" Selena tried to break the uneasy silence. "I don't feel well. Where's the store around here?" she asked, and Selena could smell the sharp odor of booze in her face. "The store is in the courtyard, on the first floor of this house," answered the mother-in-law. "You should have known better, and it's not proper to get drunk in front of guests," she added. But Casey didn't hear these words, because she had already left the door of the apartment, leaving it open. A few minutes later, while the pancakes were frying, Selena watched from the kitchen window as Casey came out of the store with a bottle of beer in her hands, sat on a bench in the yard, and smoked. As the next pancakes were being fried, she saw Harry, the neighbor's idle and drunken son, sit down next to Casey on the bench, and they began to chat animatedly. At the same time, another family was facing the dilemma of a daughter-in-law. The Weasley Seven's son John recently finished his studies at a prestigious university and got a job right away as an executive. John's mother, Mallory, had long dreamed of his wedding, so she began to rush with renewed vigor to get her son engaged in his personal life. Her son had no problems with his personal life. John has been dating Julia for a long time. They know each other well and do not imagine their lives apart. Therefore, John, not thinking long, offered Julia to move in with him. He promised that soon they would go to his parents in his native land. He would introduce them to them, and at the same time, they would determine the date of the wedding. When John arrived home with Julia, Mallory too looked on with great bewilderment. "John, what about Angelica? She loves you so much. She's been waiting for your attention for a long time. It's a fine family, decent people, and they've known you since you were a child," said Mallory to John while Julia was in the kitchen. "Mom, Angelica and I are just friends. She's nice, she's beautiful, but nothing can happen between us. Julia and I have been dating for 5 years. I can't imagine my life without her. I'm sure you'll like her very soon too," John said. "John, we're not the kind of people who can let our feelings get in the way of sentimentality. You should have realized that my father and I are in business for life, and it's going to be in your hands soon. For this system to work as it has in the past, we need reliable connections in the government. Your father has served his time in the civil service. He's about to retire, and he'll probably be replaced by Frank, Angelica's father. Close ties with that family would guarantee our position, of course, and your welfare above all. That's why Angelica is the best match for you," Mallory continued to insist. "Mom, my well-being depends only on me. I've got a good education, I have a good job, and I can achieve everything without sacrificing my happiness. If you want Frank, then be friends with him directly, without sacrificing the fate of your children. I'm sure Angelica probably feels the same way," John said. Then Mallory went back into the kitchen and looked at Julia setting the table so diligently. That girl is a good-looking girl. She had definitely received a good upbringing from her parents. She knew how to behave in public. She was polite and caring. A little later, she decided to discuss it with her husband Jacob. Jacob is a man with a lot of life experience and understanding of the realities of life. His many years of experience in leadership positions have helped him to become an insightful person. "Jacob, you should talk to your son. Why feed a girl false hope? She's probably already fantasizing about marriage and a future with him. It's time to let her know that's not gonna happen. John has a purpose in life, and that purpose is to further our cause, and he needs to do everything he can to fulfill that purpose, including getting close to Frank," Valentina said. "What does he say?" Jacob asked. What? He says he loves this Julia, that he's going to make a career for himself on his own, so Frank and I can find another way to keep in touch and other selfishness. He's young. He doesn't understand a lot of things in life. He doesn't know how to deal with reality. He won't listen to us anyway, Jacob said blankly. So if we don't stop him, he'll do whatever he wants because he's young. That's why I'm telling you to talk to him. Otherwise, I'll talk to Julia myself, and things will be much tougher, said Mallory. Mother, don't you dare upset the young ones. Why would you do that? She's someone else's child too, and I'll talk to my son. Jacob reassured her. The doorbell rang, and Cecilia, the Weasley Seven's youngest daughter, ran to open it. She looked through the peephole and shouted toward her parents, "It's Lenka." Jacob and Mallory looked at each other in silence. Angelica will be surprised to see Julia so diligently setting the table in the kitchen. Angelica is Frank's only daughter. She and John went to the same daycare, went to the same school. She's always liked John. Even after Angelica studied abroad for 5 years and returned, she still has warm feelings for John. Angelica, you're just in time. We're having a family dinner, Cecilia said and smiled enigmatically. Jacob, Mallory, hello. Dad says hi. Angelica was standing on the living room doorstep the next second, smiling her radiant smile. Hello, Angelica. Health to your parents, she heard back from John's parents. Thank you, Mallory. I heard that Oleshka came from the city. Angelica smiled enigmatically. Angelica and I will sit on the balcony. Cecilia adequately assessed the situation and tried to take Angelica away to gently prepare her to meet the new member of the family. Angelica and Cecilia were like two sisters, so when John brought Julia to the house, Cecilia was immediately worried about Angelica. She thoughtfully called Angelica and told her that John had arrived. Cecilia hurried to meet Angelica herself first, to bring her up to date with the news and prepare her before she met John. Angelica, how long have you been in touch with John? Cecilia asked. A long time ago, you might say. Lately, I hadn't been able to get in touch with him. Either he was busy, or he wasn't in the mood. I decided not to insist on communication. I decided to wait for him to come, and then I could communicate with him in person. Angelica said, not suspecting anything yet. Well, in that case, I can explain his behavior to you. He got a girlfriend. They decided to get married. He brought her to us. She's at our house now, Cecilia said. What did your parents say? Angelica asked. Mom's against it, of course. Dad hasn't spoken up yet. But believe me, his parents won't let him marry that girl. And John himself has only ever favored you. That girl from the village wanted a beautiful life and probably just turned his head, Cecilia said. But John's a grown man anyway. I wouldn't want to have a relationship with him, knowing that he intended to marry someone else. If he decides to choose her, so be it, Angelica said. Are you crazy? Don't be so naive. You realize that John is every girl's dream, and you're one of them. If you give up, there's a good chance you'll meet some strange man with strange intentions. These hunters for women's hearts are usually very skillful. Will tell you about high feelings and selfless love. They themselves will only have in mind your money and connections. I can see that in John's girlfriend. She gets up bright and early every day and tries to please every member of our family. It's understandable that she has a lot of interests, and you're just gonna put your hands down and say, whatever John decides, that's what happens. John can decide with this upstart, not with reality, Cecilia said. What do you suggest? Do you want me to fight for him? Angelica asked. Fighting or helping John make smart choices can be called many things, but you should consider that our whole family is on your side. Your whole family is on your side. Our parents and yours will only be happy about your marriage, and you both benefit from it. You think, with those initial conditions, it's possible to try, don't you? Cecilia challenged Angelique. Angelica stared thoughtfully out the window and pondered Cecilia's words. Cecilia realized she was going in the right direction and continued her speech. This plan means you won't have to work too hard. I don't know how long John and his girlfriend will be here, but Mom and I will figure something out. All you have to do is wait for our signals and proceed as instructed. Our goal is to sow discord between John and this girl, and every time he feels bad about the conflict, you will appear as an understanding friend. We'll take it from there, Cecilia said in a businesslike tone. Well, if you're willing to help me, I'm gonna try to compete for John. To be honest, I still like him. Hoping for his attention, I've rejected a lot of people. There must be some logic to it, right? Now Angelica was starting to convince herself. Julia had almost set the table in the kitchen and was waiting for her fiance's family, not realizing what events awaited her in her life with John. Jacob talked to John the next day, of course, but he made it clear that he had already decided to be with Julia, and it was useless to dissuade him. As for the rationality of getting closer to Frank's family, John advised that it would be better to marry Cecilia to their wayward son, which, of course, Mallory and Jacob would never agree to. What parents would want to marry off their daughter to an unreliable young man? And is it acceptable to play with the fate of someone else's daughter, who has crystal clear intentions of starting a family and continuing the family lineage? This is a question not usually asked in the families of grooms. A few days later, Cecilia was sitting on the balcony of their huge mansion, looking at something on her phone while chatting with one of her friends. When she was done, she went down to the kitchen on the first floor. Here Julia was diligently preparing something for dinner. Oh, it smells so good. How lucky John is to have a wife. She's beautiful and caring, and she cooks deliciously, Cecilia said with a wide smile. Julia had no idea about the family arguments surrounding her marriage to John within the Weasley family. None of the family members had given any indication that she wasn't welcome here, and they would soon begin to actively set about eliminating her. But she had taken Mallory's somewhat cold attitude as the norm. I've heard that mothers are often jealous of their sons of their daughters-in-law, yet she has had full ownership of her son for 27 years, and now I share that attention with her. Maybe she's not used to sharing her son with me yet, but that's okay. I'll find my way to her heart. She is the woman who gave birth to and raised the man of my dreams. I'll always show her the respect she deserves, no matter how she treats me. Julia thought to herself and set herself up for the best. Cecilia did not show her true attitude in any way. She treated Julia with the utmost courtesy and complimented her. When they were alone together, though, Cecilia was free to be sarcastic and caustic about Julia's background. She was the daughter of ordinary people, not of officials like John and Cecilia. But Julia's mother tried to raise her to be a decent person, so she judges everyone by herself. So when Cecilia allows you to make barbed remarks, Julia ignores them. In this way, she convinces herself that she holds the bar high in her behavior. This is a common misconception of many women, not considering the fact that others may perceive it as a weakness. I admire how divine your baked goods are. Cecilia gave Julia a fat dose of flattery. Yeah, I love working with pastry. This pie with curd and lemon. Do you want a slice? It's really hot off the presses. Julia was genuinely pleased at the attention. No thanks. I don't eat sweets. All flour and sweets are poor people's food because they are low quality and cheap. And I advise you not to eat too much of it, or you'll get fat like the village women, Cecilia said, and continued to look at Julia with a smirk. Julia was taken aback by this unexpected barb. While she was considering what to say to Cecilia, or whether she should answer at all, she asked, John, when's he coming? You didn't call him. No, she hasn't called. I think she'll be here soon, Julia said after Cecilia, who had already left the kitchen. All of Julia's euphoria over the flavorful pie had turned into an unpleasant residue. Cecilia's got a talent for it, to compliment and thereby emphasize one's belonging to the world of the chosen ones is still a skill. John arrived just in time for dinner. Cecilia met him at the entrance and held her smartphone screen up to his face. Look, This bracelet from a very famous brand just went on sale 2 weeks ago. My mum showed it to me, she really liked it. Let's give her a present and split the money and buy her this bracelet. What do you say? Cecilia asked her brother. What's the occasion? John asked. What do you need an excuse to make your mom feel good? Can't you just surprise her? How hard can it be? Cecilia began to subtly press her brother. Come on, surprise, surprise. How much is it? I'll give you the amount. You buy it yourself. Okay. Oh, okay. That'll be $500. Mine's ready, Cecilia said. John pulled out his cell phone, made a couple of clicks on the screen, and told his sister, I put it on your card. Don't forget to tell Mom it's from both of us. I want to see her happy too. John said one last time. A couple of days later at dinner, Cecilia stood up and ceremoniously handed the branded bracelet to her mother. She was surprised at the unexpected gift, but the children convinced her that it was normal to make pleasant surprises without an occasion. Mallory accepted the children's gift with great joy. At the family dinner, Cecilia announced that Angelica was having a small party tonight, and she was invited. Her parents didn't wait for Cecilia's request to let her go, but suggested that she go to Frank's house and join the party. Cecily emphasized that if it was late, she would stay there overnight. She repeated to each member of the family not to expect her for the night and to go to bed. At midnight, when all the family members were already fast asleep, Cecilia quietly opened all the doors of the house with her key and made her way to her mother's room on the chains. She knows very well where her mother keeps her precious jewelry. As one would expect, the newly gifted brand name bracelet was also in that place. Cecilia took the jewelry box and also on the chains made her way to the dressing room where Julia keeps her things. Then she also quietly closed all the doors behind her with her keys and went to continue the festivities. When Cecilia returned to her home in the morning, Mallory had already discovered the missing items and sat in confusion. When she saw Cecilia, she told her that she had lost the bracelet she had given her yesterday. Cecilia was not confused. Julia, have you seen Mom's bracelet we gave her yesterday? Julia ran out of the kitchen where she was washing dishes and answered, No, I haven't. It's a shame, Mallory. Maybe you put it somewhere and forgot about it. Julia said, I vividly remember trying it on in front of the mirror in my powder room and putting it back in its box. I even remember I was going to wear it to work today and brag to everyone that the kids gave it to me, Mallory said. Mom, let's take another good look in your room. How can anything be missing from the house if no one has touched it? Cecilia said and led her mother to the second floor. There Cecilia pretended to look for the lost bracelet for a while. The voice inside her told Julia that something dangerous was going on around her. She decided to push the unpleasant thoughts away and remembered to go to the supermarket and get some groceries. While her mother-in-law and her daughter were on the second floor, she took her bag from the dressing room and headed for the exit. Julia, wait! She was stopped by the imperious voice of Cecily, who was coming down from the second floor. I looked in my mom's room, and it's really not there. It couldn't have disappeared into nowhere. It could have ended up in another woman's hands. I was out last night. Mom was asleep, which means the other woman is you. Where is the bracelet? Cecilia asked threateningly. How could you think that about me? I didn't even touch the bracelet. Julia was even more confused. Cecilia said, then walked over to Julia, quickly grabbed her bag out of her hands, and turned it upside down. The entire contents of the bag scattered to the floor. The bracelet box fell at Mallory's feet. Julie, stealing is wrong. If John finds out, he'll be very upset. You could just ask him to give you one too. Cecilia continued in an admonishing tone. This is some kind of mistake. This is a setup. I never even thought about stealing anything from Mallory. Julia only now realized how difficult it would be for her to prove her innocence to these people, and she was horrified. As Cecilia continued to talk, Julia sprinted out the door and headed for the bench outside. She immediately called and told John everything. He promised to take care of it tonight and asked her to wait for him. At that moment, Cecilia dialed Angelica's number to delight her with the news. "Angelica, get ready. John and his girlfriend are going to have some serious problems tonight. You need to call and prove yourself a loyal friend. Make John want to spend the rest of the evening with you. Invite him out. He'll definitely go out tonight," Cecilia said and hung up. Mallory didn't pay much attention to who her daughter was whispering to on the balcony. She was completely immersed in her own emotions and only repeated to herself that she knew this girl would not bring good to the family. In the evening, there was a real showdown. Julia cried, swearing by all the saints that she had touched nothing. Cecilia, on the other hand, was unwavering in her accusations. Mallory sided with her daughter. Only Jacob realized that there seemed to be two separate factions within the family, and one of them had declared war on the other today. John realized it too. So when Angelica called him and asked him to spend the evening together in a languid voice, he briefly rejected all her offers and turned to Julia. "We need to talk in private. Mom will be late. You and Cecilia try to calm down and forget all the talk of the day," John said. He took Julia to the nearest cafe, and they discussed what had happened for a long time. John drew the right conclusions and decided to act immediately. Meanwhile, another family had their own dramas going on. Selena came home from work early so she could make dinner for the whole family. She already knows it's useless to ask her sister-in-law Cassie to do this. Even though she stays at home and doesn't work anywhere, Cassie will find 1,000 excuses to dodge any housework. Opening the door with her key, she was surprised to see unfamiliar shoes in the passage. And from the kitchen came cheerful voices. She walked into the kitchen and saw the neighbor's son Harry. As befitted Harry's usual lifestyle, there were cans of beer and some kind of snacks from bags on the table. "What's going on here? Casey, did you bring him into the house?" Selena asked. "Hello, neighbor. I was just stopping by for tea." "Peace out," Harry said, leaning back in his chair. Casey wasn't in the kitchen. She'd raised her voice from the living room. "Yes, the neighbor from the stairwell came by to say hello." Casey rushed to explain everything to her mother-in-law. "Okay, Harry, we're not being very hospitable here. You please go home, and Casey and I have chores to do," Selena said. "Everything is as the mistress says it will be. I'm leaving for sure. Ulek, you're great. Come over to my place too. We'll have a beer and play some dungeons," Harry said and walked slowly towards the exit. As soon as the door closed behind Seryoga, Selena took Casey by the elbow and said menacingly, "Are you out of your mind? How many times have I seen you messing around with that bum in the yard?" And I kept quiet, thinking you knew what you were doing. "Why the hell are you bringing strange men into the house when my son isn't here? And why is it a neighbor? Didn't you think it's abnormal to bring an ex-con into the house? A convict?" I didn't know that. Casey still didn't understand her mother-in-law's reaction. "And he told me he was in the army on contract," she continued. Selena could smell the acrid odor of alcohol from Casey. "Woe is me, woe is me. An educated, well-mannered son brought into the house of an obscure girl. She is here all the alcoholics from the neighborhood, and she drinks with them at the same time. Why do I have to go through this ordeal?" Selena clutched her heart. "So he's your neighbor. He asked to come to your house. How was I supposed to know he was a convict? Your son loves me, and you're just jealous. That's why you don't let us live in peace. I'll tell him everything," said Casey. She's always so brave when she's drunk. And she drank a lot, as Mickey's parents had noticed. By this time, Selena had already dialed her husband's number and was telling him what she thought about Casey for the umpteenth time. Harvey seemed to want to avoid quarrels in the family as always and tried to calm down his wife. She couldn't stand it and almost became hysterical. "She carries our grandson in her belly, drinks alcohol every single day, and is always hanging out with our neighbors. Now I have big doubts whether our grandson is in her belly. Talk to my son and tell him to deal with her immediately. Otherwise, I'll have to kick her out of the door myself." Casey heard those words and got turned on too. "Oh, so you did tell me that we got married in wedlock. I knew it was a red flag to any mother-in-law." She mumbled to herself and dialed Mickey's number. But that was just one episode in the life of Mickey's family. Ever since Casey arrived in the house, scandals have become a regular occurrence. He and his father barely have time to calm their women down. Mickey realized that Casey really doesn't show herself as a woman. She can't cook. She's not used to keeping her house clean. She doesn't want to work anywhere because she thinks that everyone is cheating and underpaying her. He found out about all this too late. By that time, Casey was already pregnant and demanded from Mickey to take responsibility for her and for the future child. Mickey, like a decent man, agreed to all of Casey's demands. Selena, on the other hand, couldn't accept it. She hoped to see an educated and well-mannered girl as her son's life partner. Well, at least a girl without bad habits and without the tendency to start conversations with every man in the yard. But where to go now when soon a grandson or granddaughter will be born? Selena only prayed that a healthy child would be born. Unfortunately, Casey's lifestyle didn't predispose her to that. No matter how much Selena talks about the harmfulness of beer, energy drinks, and quick snacks from bags, Casey immediately complains to Mickey that her mother is jealous and does not give her life. After the incident with the missing bracelet, John talks to his father and makes the right decision. He and Julia are not going to live peacefully in the same house with Cecilia and his mother. John rented an apartment and moved Julia there. The wedding was also decided not to postpone for later. However, both were very worried because the opponents of this wedding turned out to be enough, and it is not known what they can still throw out on this day. The news that John and Julia had planned a wedding for next month puzzled Cecilia and Angelica. Angelica was sure that Cecilia would definitely think of something to keep the wedding from happening. But when they heard the date of the wedding, they decided not to give up. There was still plenty of time. If they couldn't upset the wedding, they could organize something special right on the day of the wedding, so that the marriage wouldn't last long. This idea encouraged Cecilia, and she decided to go ahead. John and Julia decided to hold the wedding modestly and for a small circle of the closest people. They booked a restaurant and distributed invitations to all the guests. On the appointed day, Julia excitedly prepared for the most important event in her life. Her parents arrived in advance, but John's parents didn't want to meet and get to know them beforehand. "I'll see you at the wedding. I don't have time for you now," Mallory replied briefly to the introduction. John and Julia didn't pay much attention to the relationship between their parents that wasn't working out and were looking forward to the best. Angelica and Cecilia had bought fancy dresses for the occasion. But that was not all their preparations. The main surprise required more preparation and more effort. They even had to pay for it. They did not stand for the price. The long-awaited day came. The wedding was in full swing. The guests made toasts, congratulated the newlyweds, and had fun. The parents did not particularly seek each other's company, and each of them sat in the circle of their loved ones. As the evening approached its midpoint, Cecilia stepped out to make sure her plan was ready. After a long musical intermission, the guests went to their tables. An unfamiliar beautiful girl entered the room and drew the attention of all the guests to herself. Because she was wearing a wedding dress, the guests thought for a moment that they were imagining it. But Julia was still sitting next to John, and it was some other bride. John, on the other hand, turned white when he saw the girl in the wedding dress. The stranger in the wedding dress discreetly took the microphone from the Toastmasters table and began her prepared speech. "John, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing a wedding dress today. I think you remember the date exactly 4 years ago today. Long before that day, you told me that you dreamed of seeing me next to you in a white dress. Then you and I decided to realize our dream and secretly got married." The guests sobered up instantly and began to murmur among themselves. The parents looked at the girl with the microphone and John in total confusion. John stood there like a stumbling block, unable to think or say anything. At that moment, a video about the love story of John and this mysterious girl in a wedding dress started on the huge screen in the restaurant's festive hall. Yes, indeed, in the frames John shines in the image of a happy groom who is languidly waiting to meet his bride with a bouquet in his hands. In the next shots, this strange girl is spinning at the mirror and puts the finishing touches on the image of the bride. The beautiful shots are accompanied by a romantic song. The girl asked for the audience's attention and continued her speech. "And that you walked away, leaving me and my daughter. You betrayed our love, but I decided never to betray it. That's why I still wear my wedding ring." The girl raised her right hand and showed her ring finger with her wedding ring to the audience. She then continued her speech. "You told me that fate may separate us, but you will always live in my heart as my first and only love. I decided to live the rest of my life by those words. That's why I tell our daughter that Daddy will come back to the family someday and we will be happy again, as we were on this day exactly 4 years ago. John, I see now that you have decided to start a new page in your life. However long your marriage to Julia lasts, may it be a happy one. But I know for a fact that you and I will be together again. I believe that our daughter you will definitely not leave without attention and affection," the girl continued to say. The bewildered Toastmaster stood next to the girl and persuaded her to give up the microphone, but the girl deftly dodged him and walked around the hall. He finally caught up with her and almost forcibly turned off the microphone. The girl finally shouted something in the direction of the newlyweds and left the room, but the love story continued on the screen. Julia almost fainted from what she had seen and heard. Accompanied by her friend, she went to the ladies' room, barely restraining her tears and emotions. The festive mood of the guests vanished in an instant. Jacob, who was almost impossible to get out of his mind, shook his head and sat with his hands over his face. Julia's parents started looking for their daughter to comfort her. They were even ready to take her away from here forever if she wanted to. John's friends said something indignant to him, but he heard nothing. In his head, there was only one thought: to take the microphone from the Toastmaster and all the guests to say the names of those who came up with this cynical number. But it was too late. The guests got into several groups and hurriedly left the hall to give time to the heroes of today to sort out among themselves. Who knows, maybe the showdown would result in the wedding being cancelled. John got up from his seat and headed after Julia. He found her in the ladies' room. John was sure she was probably sobbing or hysterical by now, but it seemed he still underestimated her. "John, do you know this girl?" Julia asked. She was a little dejected, but she was in control and seemed to understand where the wind was coming from. "This is the first time I've ever seen her. In fact, I don't understand what kind of show this is. I've never dressed up as a groom before, and this is the first time I've ever done it, believe me. It's some kind of a setup, and I'll take care of it. It's only a matter of 2 minutes," said John. "Yes, I'd like to believe that version too. But how do we save the situation?" Julia asked. "The only people left in the audience are parents and friends. We'll continue with them. I'll take the microphone myself now and comment briefly, and that's it," John said. Everyone's mood was ruined. Only Angelica and Cecilia were sitting in the car in the restaurant parking lot, waiting with great curiosity to see how Julia would behave next. At that moment, someone knocked on the window of their car. Cecilia saw a hired actress from a local club who had played the role of the jilted bride brilliantly. She was waiting for the rest of her fee. The guests were so dumbfounded by what was happening that no one even paid attention to the fact that the strange bride, leaving the restaurant, got into the car of the acting troupe with large inscriptions and logo. She during this time managed to calmly change her clothes disband her hair, and put on glasses, so that no one even accidentally did not recognize her. The actress took the money, gave her accomplices their shares in the car, and the troupe left. "I'd never dreamed of such a weird wedding," Julia said, finally reaching the apartment. "I'll start looking into who's behind this tomorrow. I think the event organizers and maybe the restaurant staff are involved. They're not going to get away with this," John said. "Yes, this is a case where exposure is a must," Julia added. "What did your parents say?" "They're the most embarrassed of all. And mine didn't give them a very warm welcome," John said. "Well, my mom is aware that I have become the classic unloved daughter-in-law to my mother-in-law. I warned them that there might be all sorts of surprises, but I don't think they were ready for just such a surprise." Julia even smiled a little. John looked at her smile and felt immense gratitude for her trust and faith in him. It was only Julia's calmness and judgment that had saved the day. Although she had lost her temper at first, she was able to pull herself together quickly and not let the insidious plans of her detractors come to fruition. After the wedding, Angelica and Cecilia waited several days for news from the newlyweds. But there was no news. Angelica realized that it was pointless to keep fighting for John. Only Cecilia was not going to give up. She had a good reason. Cecilia works as a financial director for her mother. Mallory is about to take a well-deserved vacation. Of course, she's grooming her daughter to take her place. But for Mallory's business to continue to thrive from steady government contracts, someone in the family is bound to be in a position of power. Jacob, who has served as first deputy governor for more than 20 years, is about to take a well-deserved vacation. And that could mean the state contracts could go away and Mallory's firm could go out of business. Frakes had his eye on the job for a long time, and he's made no secret of it. And Jacob sees him as a worthy heir to his chair. In order for the scheme to continue to feed all those who have long been accustomed to the trough, there must be a very close cohesion between these people. Cecilia understood this very well. Therefore, she spared no money, time and energy to get rid of Julia and set up her brother John with the only daughter of Frank's family. But Julia turned out to be a tough nut to crack. During the next week after the wedding, John had no trouble figuring out how the strange girl got into the restaurant and how she got the dubious love story video broadcast. The restaurant staff, under pressure from John's friends in law enforcement, quickly admitted that some people came and made their own changes to the wedding program. They did not elaborate on what the specific changes were. That was their mistake. And none of them knew the actress. John found that actress through social media. When she was brought to the police station, she refused to talk. While the police officers were trying to get some information, they got a call from above asking them to release the actress immediately. John was pleased with the fact that it was possible to prove to everyone that it was an order number. And the identities of the people who invented and ordered all this noise were no longer so important. Well, I'll find out. They'll tell me it's my own sister Cecilia and her friend Angelica. Maybe even my mother knows. Who's going to feel better? I already know they're always plotting against Julia and our marriage. In time they will get tired of it and stop these cheap tricks. John explained his version to his friends. The friends did not insist on continuing the investigation. They were more worried about Julia and her reaction. When John told them that she was very calm and reasonable, the friends were very surprised and noted that John had really met a worthy woman. John himself knew this, and now he was quietly proud of it. Since the birth of her grandson Frederick, Selena has been forced to live on two homes. Between family and business, she makes sure to find time to drop in on Casey and Mickey. Casey continues to resent this, believing that mother-in-law interferes in her life. In fact, Casey has, as one might assume, become a worthless mother. She has absolutely no maternal feelings for her child. She is still drawn to the streets, where she can drink with someone or just disappear for long periods of time. That's when the child is left alone. Selena hopes to get her grandson into a kindergarten soon, and then she will feel better for him. But for now, the kindergarten refuses to accept him, as little Frederick is severely delayed in development. Today, Selena decided to visit her son's family again. She opened the door with her key. In the hallway, she saw the shoes of little Frederick and realized that the child was home alone again. The first thing she did was look in the children's room. Frederick is not here, and it is not by chance. He doesn't like to sit here. Usually little Frederick likes to mess around either in the bathroom or in the kitchen. Selena hurried into the kitchen. The kitchen door was closed for some reason. Selena opened it, and at the same moment her heart leaped into her heels. In front of the open windows of the kitchen balcony stands Frederick's plastic toy table, and on the table is his stool. Frederick himself stands on this stool and almost jumps out of the window, trying to scare away the pigeons that are crowding the window. Seeing her grandson in such a precarious position, Celine cried out his name. Frederick turned around and saw his grandmother running toward him. The child thought it was just a normal game. Many children think if someone is running towards them, they will catch up soon, hence the need to run. As Selena covered the distance between the kitchen door and the window in a few steps, Frederick managed to sneak onto the windowsill. He wasn't looking into the abyss where he wanted to take a step. He was looking at his dazed grandmother, and he was indescribably amused by it. Frederick was saved from the last fatal step by the deft movement of the grandmother when she was able to grasp Frederick with both hands. Selena lifted her grandson off the windowsill and carried him into the living room. Little Frederick still didn't understand what could have happened and continued to laugh, considering himself in the game. She dialed Casey's number. The latter didn't answer right away. As soon as Casey picked up, Selena almost shouted at her, "Where the hell are you? What kind of mother are you?" A child almost fell out of the window. "Selena, who asked you to come to us anytime you want?" "I can manage my child just fine without your help. I just went to the store for a few minutes," Casey said. Casey seems to be completely incapable of understanding the meaning of words and the consequences of various rash actions. Selena realized that a long time ago, and she's been trying to get it out to Mickey. But what's the use? By the way, does Mickey even know what's going on in the house while he's away? She dialed Mickey's number and told him what tragedy had been avoided a few minutes ago. "Mickey, this isn't a joke anymore. Your Casey's not likely to ever grow up and realize her responsibilities in life. But we're risking Frederick's safety and his life for her. Please don't ruin your life with her. Try to get rid of her. I can raise my grandson myself. It's better for him. And at least you'll have a chance to meet a decent woman," Selena said. She didn't notice that by then Casey was already in the apartment and had overheard the whole conversation. As soon as Selena hung up the phone, Casey burst into the living room and tried to snatch Frederick out of her grandmother's arms. As she did so, she was loudly resentful. "You still haven't gotten over your jealousy. You're even willing to divorce Mickey and me over it. You've been giving us a hard time since the beginning. We separated from you to save our family, but you keep interfering with it even from a distance," Casey said. "Otherwise, you'd still want to drink with the first man you meet, loiter and parasitize my son. You're hiding behind my son to continue your promiscuous lifestyle. You can't even realize that by doing so, you are sacrificing your child." Selena once again tries to get through to Casey, but in vain. There were many such conversations and incidents in this family's life, but they were useless to Casey. This time, after Selena threatened to take Frederick back to her place, Casey was afraid that she might push Mickey toward divorce. Without thinking long, she made a decision that would help keep Mickey in her life. A couple of months later, she was able to successfully implement her plan. The pregnancy test showed 2 stripes. Casey was confident that Mickey would not abandon a pregnant woman and then a woman with 2 children, and Selena would hardly dare to take on the responsibility of 2 small children at once at her advanced age. Casey was delighted with her resourceful decision and looked forward to the birth of her second baby girl. However, nothing had changed in her lifestyle. Parallel to these events, there were also changes in John's life with Julia. After the unpleasant surprise at the wedding, they didn't communicate with John's loved ones for a long time. During this time, they learned from the news that Jacob Wesley had left his post and Frank had taken his place. Surely, the question of removing Julia from John's life had become even more pressing for this family. But John and Julia decided to arrange their lives as they saw fit. John successfully built his career, succeeding at every step he took. Julia also worked until the birth of their daughter, Eva. Eva is now 3 years old. She makes her parents happy every minute and gives them endless happiness. Julia was thinking about going back to work these days. John was against it. "Julia, I don't want our Eva to have the stress of adjusting to daycare. She's such a homebody. In a couple of years, she'll want to be around other kids. Then you can think about work. Right now, I'm still willing to work day and night so that you and your daughter don't need anything," John said. "But I'm already bored sitting at home." Julia stretched lazily. Carrying a child under your heart, giving birth to it, and raising it is a huge labor. It's just something society has come to take for granted. I don't want to be so consumeristic with you. You need to rest and recuperate, and then you can think about work, if you think it would be good for you," John said. Such words sounded very convincing to Julia. She continued to enjoy motherhood and lovingly cared for Eva. It was a pity, though, that Eva had not yet been seen by her grandparents. They would have loved her for sure, and maybe they could forget old conflicts and finally recognize Julia's right to be near John. One cozy family evening, John called to say he wasn't expected for dinner tonight. This has happened to him often since he became an executive. Julia is very understanding. If she can't make it in time for dinner, she'll come back later. She and her daughter have a great time and are not affected by John's busy schedule. After a while, John said that soon there will be a corporate party in the company and everyone should come with their other halves. Julia happily agreed, as she had not known any of John's colleagues until then. John's team turned out to be really united and cheerful. The guests were having fun, singing and dancing. At some point, Julia decided to go to the ladies' room. She had not noticed until then that some of the guests had been watching her closely since the beginning of the evening, waiting for a more private moment with her. Following Julia out of the room was this mysterious man. As Julia stood in front of the restroom mirror fixing her hair, the mystery man dared to approach her, and it was a woman of great beauty, statuesque and haughty. "Hi, what's your name?" the lady asked. "I'm Julia. My spouse works in this company as a CFO," Julia said proudly. "I know him," the lady smiled enigmatically. The lady didn't say anything else and just watched Julia's every move with a smile. If at first she had thought that one of John's colleagues had decided to meet her just for the sake of politeness, now she was a little confused. The lady seemed to be following her purposefully. "How long have you and John been together?" the lady asked. 5 years in total, 4 of which we've been married. We have a wonderful daughter." Julia tried not to give away her doubts and keep her composure. "A little early," said the lady and smiled even wider. "What's a little early?" Julia asked. "It's a little early for him to start cheating on you, honey. Maybe it's for the best, and it'll be easier for you to find your man." She began to fix her hair thoughtfully. "What are you trying to say?" "It's okay. John loves me, I love him too. You gave birth to a daughter, I can give him a son. Just keep that in mind. The sooner you realize that I'll win, the easier it will be for you," the lady said, looking straight into Julia's eyes. Julia had an immediate sense of déjà vu. Throughout her life with John, how many times had she heard such threats? She couldn't count them all. As a rule, it was usually someone close to John who was behind them. Julia was glad that this time she hadn't given in to her emotions and had figured out what was going on almost immediately. On the way home, John asked about Julia's impressions of his co-workers. She shared all the positive aspects of the evening, but a strange lady came up to me and tried to tell on you. But I'm an old-timer, and I know that intrigue against our family can be found anywhere, so I didn't argue with the lady. And by the way, I didn't even ask her name, Julia said, looking at her husband. John didn't comment on this, but drove on in silence. It was as if a whirlwind of emotion had started inside him, and he was trying to hide it carefully. Julia thought that John, too, had long since had enough of these cheap tricks, and that was why he was reacting in such a way. At this point, this incident was forgotten. After the birth of the second child, Casey was much less worried about her marriage to Mickey. Her position in the family is now stronger. Mickey loves his son and daughter very much. For their sake, he is ready to do anything. If Selena does not constantly interfere, as it seems to Casey, then Mickey is simply an ideal husband. But for Casey, it was completely unexpected when Mickey once poured a flood of emotions on her. Casey, a mother of two, can't be so careless. How many times can you leave your kids alone and go out with questionable friends? Who are these friends of yours? They're basically backyard drunks and bums. Do you really think you're on the same level as them? Everything has to be in moderation. I can't take endless days off work to take care of the kids. You need to rethink your lifestyle and get smart, said Mickey. Casey was even more confused. So she thought Mickey was on her side, but somehow Selena had swayed him to her side. It looked like her mother-in-law was getting serious about her now. That's what she thought, and took all the objective criticism she got. After a while, she really decided to change and become a responsible mother. In her mind, it looked like a working and earning woman. She decided to make a surprise for Mickey. She got a job as a sauna administrator, and Mickey informed her about it only on the eve of the first working day. But Mickey surprised her again with his reaction. Casey, you don't need to work and make money. I'm doing just fine. You just take good care of the children and don't think about money and work while they are little. When they grow up and become more independent, then please work for your own pleasure, Mickey said. Casey was very upset. She felt like she was being picked on for nothing. Everything she did was wrong, and everything was wrong. She remembered some advice from a fashion magazine that a woman should never give up on her goals, no matter what a man told her. So she decided not to give in to Mickey and go to work. Working in a sauna meant socializing with different people. However, those who wanted to socialize in the sauna often turned out to be drunk people. And these conversations are very specific. Young lady, you're so beautiful, but you're so sad. Did someone hurt you? On Casey's first day at work, there was a kind person at work who was ready to listen to her and feel sorry for her. Casey, out of the goodness of her heart, told her whole family story. The random visitor of the sauna must have regretted in his heart that he had started this conversation, but out of politeness, he listened to her to the end. As a man who lives solely in accord with his spontaneous impulses, the casual visitor made the decision to try to become a cordial friend to Casey. His name was Tony. Casey was getting more and more involved with Tony. He waited for her after work and took her to bars. Casey loved it when a man could just listen to your complaints and support you. And if he bought her a drink or a cocktail, in Casey's mind that equaled universal love. So Tony became a new meaning of life for her. Now, Casey could talk to him day and night. If Mickey or Selena were in a bad mood again, she could write or call Tony at any time. He would find time to take her to a bar, listen to her, and then spend a pleasant evening in solitude. Mickey was most worried about the children on a long business trip. The day before, he had sat Casey across from him and urged her to be more attentive and responsible for just a couple of weeks until he returned from his business trip. Casey took it all in stride again, but as soon as Mickey left, Casey asked her neighbor to watch the kids and went on the trip Tony had been asking her to take for a long time. Casey returned from her trip just before Mickey arrived, but the trouble was, their son Frederick seemed a little sick. Both of his eyes were swollen shut and almost completely closed. Casey rebuked her neighbor for not keeping a good eye on him. When Mickey returned from his business trip and saw his son in such a state, he was furious. He decided to take Frederick to the doctor that same evening. The doctor examined the child and shook his head. It is an infectious disease that affects the eyeballs very quickly. It's especially dangerous for children. I'll certainly try to treat it now, but you're running out of time. Your son is at risk of losing his sight completely, the doctor said. Indeed, Frederick's eyes began to itch and ache right after Casey left for her trip. By the time she returned, the damage to his eyes was extensive, and the boy had almost stopped seeing. Mickey expressed all his anger and resentment toward Casey. She, on the other hand, saw no fault in it. She still believes that Mickey just doesn't let her live the life she wants, especially since Tony assures her that he does. That night, Casey couldn't take it any longer and expressed everything she had in her heart. You restrict me from everything. You didn't like it when I stayed home. I got a job and found myself. Now I finally feel like a free person, but you don't want to respect that. I'm a human being too, and I have the right to live my life the way I want, said Casey. Casey, for God's sake, I too dream of you living a full life. But now that you're a mother of 2 children, isn't it time to consider them in your life? Do you feel like you can leave the house at any time to go out with your friends and party until morning? And mind you, this doesn't happen on holidays or on a schedule. It's your normal way of life. You reproach me with limitation. But do you have any standards of life yourself? Mickey asked. You're always torturing me with your conditions and demands, but it's different with Tony. He understands and supports me. I can have fun with him and talk to him. Not like you and your family, who have to do everything according to a set of rules, Casey blurted out. Mickey had a vague idea, of course, that working in an entertainment establishment was very much to Casey's liking. But he hadn't expected her to find another entertainer so quickly and to believe that it was the highest of feelings for life. By then, he'd had enough of that kind of life. As a result of that evening's arguments, they decided to part ways. Mickey felt it was right for the children to be raised by a hired nanny or their grandmother. Casey packed her things and left for Tony's. Mickey didn't bother to stop her. He was more concerned about Frederick's health. According to the doctor, only a major operation could restore his sight. And before the operation, someone should take care of the children. Selena, of course, had taken over completely. Mickey has decided to redouble his efforts at work to save up the money for the operation as soon as possible. He had to hurry up, because Frederick would soon be starting preschool, and then it wouldn't be long before school. Changes were on the way for the second family. Julia only now noticed how much John had changed lately. He'd grown cold to her. Where before he would only stay at work for a few hours, now he might stay all night or even several nights. Julia was afraid to suspect him of cheating. She realized that if she judged based only on her assumptions, it would mislead her even more. And in order not to make mistakes in relationships, she needed to be very patient and judicious. Her past experience is a testament to that. How many times she could give in to the impulse of her emotions and lose her relationship with John for no good reason. So she decided not to make any decisions until she sees with her own eyes John's infidelity or another reason for his cooling off. Eva is already big enough, goes to kindergarten and dreams of going to school sooner. Julia intends to go to work soon and distract herself from bad thoughts about John. Could it be that sitting on such a long maternity leave, she too has become monotonous and uninteresting for John? On one such evening, John arrived unexpectedly early. He was drunk, something Julia had not observed him doing before. Little Eva missed her father and was now trying to draw attention to herself in every possible way. Julia noticed this and said, "Since you're home, why don't you and Eva take a walk while I clean the house and make dinner? Don't you have time to walk the baby all day?" John said in surprise, "We go out with her every day. Can't you see she misses you? Both parents are important to a child." "I don't understand your reaction," Julia said in a calm tone. "Both parents? Here I am, for example, an adult child, almost 5 years out of touch with my parents. What am I supposed to do?" John came very close and looked at Julia angrily. Julia was dumbfounded by John's unexpected behavior. She seemed to realize where her husband wanted to take the conversation. While she was trying to answer, John continued his claims. "Julia, do you think it's okay that I don't talk to my parents or even try? As a mom, you're supposed to be better at this than I am. Or do you still think my parents are our enemies?" Julia realized that she had been hesitant to talk to John about it for such a long time. She'd realized for a long time that she and John would sooner or later have to resolve the issue with her parents, and most likely make the first step toward reconciliation. Only she knew John's adamant nature and had been hesitant to suggest it to him. And now she realizes that she was too late with this conversation. That night, Julia clearly realized that John felt resentment and anger towards Julia for not communicating with his parents. Like a reasonable woman, instead of returning resentment and recriminations, she began to think of ways to repair John's relationship with his parents. Eventually, she was able to formulate a clear plan. Mallory's birthday was coming up. Under this pretext, they will visit the parents with gifts, show them a granddaughter, and Julia will try to get Mallory back to her. But these plans were not to be. A couple days later, John came home drunk again. He had gotten caught up in some little thing and turned it into a big family scandal. This time, Julia learned something else new. John threatened to kick her out of the house, and Eva would stay with him. But Julia didn't understand why she deserved such an attitude. Her beloved husband didn't bother to explain. From that moment on, constant recriminations and scandals became a common occurrence in Julia's family life. It was little Eva who suffered the most. She began to sleep badly at night and practically refused to eat. After a while, her hair began to fall out. Then Julia became angry too. She decided to put an end to these endless conflicts, no matter what it cost her. She only had to look closely at his behavior to understand the reason for it. He had obviously been hiding something from her for a long time, but he had no desire to hide it any longer. In such cases, modern people are always helped by cell phones. Julia had never allowed herself to violate her husband's personal boundaries before, but today she realized that she had to deal with everything urgently and make important decisions. She reached for John's cell phone with these thoughts in mind. She wasn't too surprised when she found correspondence with someone named Sarah. There she saw various photos of Sarah and recognized her at once. It was the same lady who approached Julia at the corporate party and assured her that she and John were in great love. Then Julia took it for another intrigue of her enemies. Turns out she was very wrong. Judging by the correspondence, Sarah and John have gone very far. They have been living as a family for a long time and making common plans for the future. According to Sarah's messages, she has now pushed John into a narrow framework and set conditions for him to choose one of two women. Of course, Sarah makes it clear by the word choice that it's eliminating Julia and starting a new life with her. At that moment, John came out of the bathroom and saw Julia with his phone in her hands. Julia didn't pretend that nothing had happened. She was even relieved that the situation was finally clearer. John, too, seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Julia silently began to pack her daughter's things and put them in her suitcase. John saw the whole process and did not react. Couldn't you just say it without these protracted scandals that have been going on for almost 6 months? Julia was talking to herself. Julia has a long journey ahead of her as her parents live in another area. But Julia did not want to go to them. She had already thought out her future life. She and Eva would get to the capital. She would put her in a kindergarten, find a job, solve the housing problem, and then she would go to her parents and tell them about everything. And maybe John will still come to his senses and make a step forward during this time. In this case, Julia is ready to think everything over and once again try to save the family. But now she sees no point in it, as John is completely infatuated with Sarah, and in his picture of the world Julia is still an extra person. As Julia packed 2 suitcases and headed for the exit, John stopped her. "Take only your things. Eva will stay with me," he said in a determined tone. "You'll have a new life now. Eva is still young and she has suffered enough from our fights with you. She needs care and peace, so I will take her with me anyway," Julia said. "Where will you take her? You have no job, no place to live. I won't let my child suffer a miserable existence. Please don't forget that Eve is the daughter of the Weasley family. She's entitled to a certain standard of living," John said, shocking Julia once again. The long argument turned into a loud scandal. As a result, John pushed Julia so that she fell to the floor. While she got up and came to her senses, he took her apartment keys, locked the door from the outside and left. Julia had intended to pick up Eva from the daycare center and go straight to the train station. Now she wouldn't get to the daycare center either. She tried to call John and talk to him, but he dropped her calls. Julia hoped to the last minute that John would pick Eva up from the daycare center and bring her home in the evening. But in the evening, neither John nor Eva was there. She continued to call John persistently until she realized that he had finally blacklisted her. John showed up well past midnight. He was drunk again and incredibly angry with Julia. "Where's Eva? Did you pick her up from daycare?" Julia asked. "Don't worry about Eve. She's part of the Weasley family. It's about time she met her folks. I picked her up from preschool and took her to her parents' house. She's immensely loved and spoiled there. You can go wherever you want now." John opened the front door of the apartment and pointed his finger toward the exit. "John, come on. Eve's just a little girl. You can't keep me away from her. You tell me what I've done to deserve this punishment. I'm ready to let you go. I've always been ready to reconcile with your parents and try endlessly to win their favor. You're wrong if you think I've separated you from them. John, let's calmly discuss everything and make a decision together," Julia pleaded, but it was useless. John didn't listen to her words. He first pushed her suitcase out the door, then took her by the arm and pushed her out onto the landing. Julia realized that she had failed in her fight for her love. If she had been able to defeat all the intrigues thanks to John's love and support, what about now that he had betrayed her? Julia wandered around the city all night with her suitcase. In the morning, she decided to go to John's parents and try to talk to them. Her goal was to get her daughter back at any cost. Early in the morning, she pulled up in a cab to John's parents' house. She pressed the doorbell, and it didn't take long for the answer to come. Someone came to the door, opened it, and looked at Julia questioningly. "Hello, I'm here to see Mallory and Jacob," Julia said. She wondered if the strange woman who answered the door was the Weasleys' new maid, or one of the other household helpers. "I'm sorry, you mean the Weasleys? They sold the house 6 months ago and moved out. We're the owners now, and we don't know the Weasleys' new address," the strange woman said. Julia apologized for the disturbance, walked away from the gate, sat down under the fence, and tried to figure out how she could find the Weasley family. After a while, she got up and went around to all the neighbors, hoping to find out some information about the Weasleys' new place of residence. But the Weasleys were not in the habit of talking to their neighbors. Consequently, none of the neighbors even knew that the Weasleys had moved here at all. That was the first day of Julia's vagabonding. She didn't have much money on her. If she spent it on a night in a hotel now, there would be no money left for the journey. So she decided to spend the night at the nearest train station. Early the next day, she arrived at John's office and waited for him in the parking lot. It wasn't hard to catch John. Julia saw his car and came running. It was the same Sarah who got out of the car first, then John. Julia's attempts to talk to John were fruitless. He pushed Julia away from him and quickened his stride, heading for the entrance to his office. Sarah watched sullenly, then snorted in his wake, and together they hid behind the glass door of the business center. After 3 days of such tossing around, Julia realized that it was useless to fight for her daughter. She herself was exhausted during this time. She was not used to living on the streets. Julia decided to get to the city, there to try to organize her life, to gain new strength, and with the help of a lawyer to get justice. Tired, battered, and shabby, Julia had a hard time getting to the bus station and boarding the train. A few years earlier, Mickey's family had suffered a great sorrow. His eldest son had lost his eyesight because of his mother, Casey's negligence. Thankfully, at the time, Grandma Selena was alive and well. She took the children to her and took care of them. Mickey then set a goal to do the operation at any cost and restore his son's sight before he went to school. But when he saved up the necessary amount of money, it turned out that Frederick had a whole bunch of other diseases that did not allow him to undergo the operation. Doctors advised to cure other diseases first, and then only to perform eye surgery. So Frederick will be late for school for at least 2 years. In the meantime, he has to attend a school for the blind. Selena prayed and dreamed that her grandson Frederick would finally regain his sight and become a full-fledged child. But by then, she herself was already on the brink. Her life was cut short by an unexpected stroke. Frederick and Ariana, who was so accustomed to their grandmother, suffered the most. They missed her terribly. Then Mickey took them to his house and found a good nanny. The nanny helped them with organizing their lives until Frederick's surgery. Fortunately, the surgery was a success. The very next day, Frederick opened his eyes very cautiously and saw his daddy Mickey and his little sister Ariana in front of him. There was no limit to his happiness. He had lived a blind life for more than 5 years. Now he had to reacquaint himself with his surroundings, and it was a process he was enjoying immensely. Frederick couldn't seem to get enough of the world. Mickey, too, was endlessly happy about it. He took a vacation to spend as much time as possible with his children. The single father and his 2 children walked in the parks from morning to night, exploring nature, drawing and learning about the world of colors. Mickey was very inspired by his deep experience of being a father. Amidst the inspiration, the idea came to him to take a family trip across the country. After a couple of days, he gathered his children and traveled by train to the Tumen region to explore the unseen mysteries of the domestic expanse. There they spent an exciting 14 days and seemed a little even tired of the experience. They were looking forward to finally getting on the train and starting to explore the new pictures outside the window again. Mickey and the 2 children were not far from Julia, who was already fast asleep from fatigue. The train had already moved off. Frederick and Ariana did not sit quietly for long. After a few minutes, Frederick's curiosity about the world awoke again. He stared wide-eyed at the scenery outside the windows and continued to ask his father questions. "Daddy, what color are the mountains?" "The mountains are dark blue or gray. It all depends on the specific area." "You say the mountains are dark blue, and your pants are dark blue too. But then why don't they look alike?" Frederick asked. "Because it's clothes, and there's mountains, nature." Ariana tried to appear omniscient and answered her brother's questions. "Daddy, what color is Auntie's suitcase?" Frederick asked again. "It's burgundy, son." "And burgundy is also pomegranate and tomato," Ariana added. "No, daughter. Pomegranate is scarlet. Tomatoes are red or pink." Mickey patiently explained to his children. "I get it. Pink is like paint on this aunt's lips, Frederick said. He came close to Julia and almost poked his finger into her lips. If Julia had heard the annoying talk before, she opened her eyes abruptly and raised her head. Her body was shattered with fatigue. Her head ached, and she really wanted to sleep in this position for at least an hour. But this boy had turned his full attention to Julia and was asking his father about every detail of her clothes. Julia herself didn't notice how she had flared up at one point. "Man, maybe you can calm your child down. He asks too many questions. At this age, he should know a lot and certainly control his behavior in society," she said. Mickey clearly didn't like that remark. "Lady, don't be rude. You don't know anything about my son, and I won't let anyone make any remarks about him," said Mickey. "It's worse for you. Your son will grow up to be a rude bore." Julia didn't recognize herself in her emotions. "My son has recently started to see the world. Before that, he was blind. He is only in his second month of exploring his surroundings with his eyesight. I am doing my best to keep him looking at the world with an exploratory eye," Mickey said, and switched to talking to his son. "And you probably don't have children of your own, so you don't know anything about this business," the older woman said toward Julia. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm the best mother in the world, and I'll prove it. In the meantime, the fate of my child will be decided by an evil woman like you," Julia replied. "So rude," snorted the older woman and turned away to the window. "Where's the mother of your children? Isn't it hard for you to be a single father?" Another middle-aged woman approached Mickey. Mickey decided to ignore the curious questions of the others and continued talking to his children. But Julia was no longer able to control her emotions. She decided to answer instead of Mickey. "Most likely his family survived the mother of those children, and now they are building the most caring relatives," Julia said, closed her eyes and pretended to be asleep. Mickey was confused. On the one hand, the lady had hit the mark. On the other hand, she wasn't quite right. So he decided to answer her. "Society likes to blame men for not being involved enough in raising children. But even among mothers, there are unworthy ones who can leave their children in the middle of nowhere and quietly go on a long journey." Now, Mickey's words stick like an arrow into Julia's heart. For the past few days, Julia has been frantically trying to ward off the idea that she would be an unworthy mother if she left her daughter with her relatives and went away on her own, and then a complete stranger steps on her heartstrings. Young people, everything happens when you are young. Most importantly, if you sincerely love your family and do not betray yourselves in this love, then any hardships in life will be solved. It seems to me that you both have faced great adversity in your married life, and each of you blames the other. We don't know the whole situation. That may be the case, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that you manage once again to find your strength and move on. Whether it is a direction to meet your family or from your family, let your hearts decide," said the elderly man with glasses. The rest of the way, they each thought about their own thoughts. Julia tried to imagine John in Mickey's place. Would he be able to care for his family as much as he did and protect it from outside attacks? Until recently, she believed that was the case, but it turned out not to be so at all. Mickey has realized from Julia's words that she has been forcibly deprived of her child and is depressed about it. He now tries to imagine Casey, who has never suffered much in her life for the sake of her children. At another station, the train stopped and passengers began to get off. Julia deliberately waited to be the last to get off. Wandering around in the unfamiliar area looking for a coffee machine, she found herself once again not far from Mickey and his children. They were picking out ice cream. "Hey Dad, you can't let kids eat ice cream in this weather. The kid's just out of surgery, so he needs to be careful of inflammation," Julia said and went on her way. Mickey did just that. He persuaded the children to give up ice cream and buy something else that wasn't cold. The children also clearly heard the words of the strange aunt and did not object. The train finally arrived at the final station. By this time, Julia had had enough sleep, and she felt energized. "Auntie, you have beautiful hair," said little Ariana to Julia, touching her hair with her little hands. Julia felt awful that her daughter had stayed somewhere else, while she was already in another city thousands of kilometers away. Ariana reminded her of Eve, who also admired her mother's hair and loved to mess with it for hours, trying to make it look nice. Julia looked at the girl silently, hugged her, and held her to her chest. At that moment, tears streamed from her eyes. She had barely contained her emotions for so many days, and now it seemed she no longer had the strength to control them. Mickey and Frederick looked at Julia and Ariana in surprise. "Don't cry, or your mascara will run out and smear all your makeup," Ariana said, and wiped Julia's tears away with her little hands. On the one hand, Julia was amused that this little princess was as knowledgeable about women's issues as her Eva was. On the other hand, when now she could see her daughter and hold her to her chest, would the Weasley family allow her to do that? "You'll forgive me for my emotions, I couldn't help myself." Julia said goodbye and looked at Mickey. "We all do. Which way are you going now?" Mickey asked. "I don't know yet. This is my first time in DC in the last 5 years. My parents live in a different area. I used to have friends, so I'll try to find them for the first time," Julia said. "Come with us. We have plenty of room in the apartment. You can rest and then start looking for your friends," Mickey suggested. "Auntie, come with us. I'll show you my makeup." "If you want, I'll do your hair," said little Ariana. Julia realized that she could not let go of this little girl, so she didn't resist the invitation to spend the night. It turned out that Mickey lived in a spacious and well-maintained apartment. Despite the absence of female hands, the apartment was perfectly clean and cozy. That night, Mickey ordered pizza. They had dinner together. The kids kept sharing their impressions and boring Julia with their questions. When it was time for bed, Mickey made Julia's bed in the living room. He himself went to tuck the kids into their rooms. The next morning, Julia intended to leave before the family woke up, but she didn't succeed. As soon as she tiptoed out of the bathroom, Ariana came running to her. "I promised you a beautiful hairdo. Let's do it now, shall we?" she suggested. Julia felt she could not refuse to let her little hands play with her hair for anything in the world. Her longing for her daughter was tearing at every fiber of her being. As much as Julia forced herself to leave early from the house of strangers, her soul did not want to part with Ariana. She promised herself that she would only make breakfast for the children and then leave to find her friends. When breakfast was ready, Ariana asked to stay and have breakfast together. At this time, the babysitter came to see them. Mickey sent the children for a walk with a nanny and started talking to Julia. "I can see you're having a hard time. What happened? What events have caused you to be so depressed?" Mickey asked. Julia told the whole story of her family life. Mickey realized that the girl was in a rather difficult situation and offered to help her with work. But Julia thanked him for his participation and refused to help. She kept hoping to find her friend Elizabeth, who had graduated from law school and was building a career in her specialty the last time they saw each other. Julia hoped to get some counseling from her friend and then think about setting up her life. Mickey walked her to the door and told her that if she didn't find her friend by tonight, she could go back to his apartment. Julia wandered around the city all day, trying to remember the address of Elizabeth's office, but the day ended without success. In the evening, it was necessary to return to Mickey's family again. The children, especially Ariana, was immensely happy to have Julia back. After a few days of empty attempts to find anyone she knew, Julia realized that she had been wrong to refuse Mickey's help in finding a job. She reminded him about it, and in 2 days, Julia's job search was solved successfully. She was hired by a company where Mickey's friend is the manager. Julia started working and continued to live in Mickey's apartment. She first offered some money for living expenses, Mickey ignored the question and said nothing. Her longing for her daughter was somewhat assuaged by Ariana. Frederick turned out to be a very sociable guy, so Julia quickly made friends with him. Julia got her first paycheck, and by that time she had looked for an apartment to rent. But before she moved in, she went to a lawyer for advice. He promised to help, but he had to drive her to the Tumen region at his own expense and pay a lot of additional expenses. All this requires additional time. The children accepted Julia's move with sadness. Julia promised to invite them to a housewarming party in the near future. The housewarming took place exactly 1 week later. Frederick and Ariana were sad that Julia didn't want to stay with them. They were even sadder that Daddy would soon go to work and would have little time for them. On one of the most ordinary days, Mickey called Julia and asked in an excited voice if Frederick and Ariana had come to see her. Julia was surprised because the children had definitely not come to see her. Mickey revealed that the children had left a note saying that they had gone to visit Julia. Julia wanted to take a cab and rush over to Mickey's house. But what would happen if the children came to her house while she was away? And the time was getting closer to evening. Mickey went to look for the children in the nearest neighborhood, while Julia waited for them at her house. A lot of time had passed, and there was no word from the kids. Mickey had to go to the police. The police were just looking for Mickey's contacts at the time. It turned out that Frederick and Ariana really decided to go to visit Julia, but on the way they got lost. They were found by the police and taken to the police station. When Mickey and Julia arrived at the police station, the time was well past midnight. After what had happened, Mickey decided to have a serious talk with Julia. Whereas before he had offered Julia a life together as help, now he was asking her for the sake of his children. He even promised to pay Julia just to keep his children happy, but Julia took offense at the offer to pay her money for company. She agreed to move back into Mickey's apartment. By that time, she realized that she had become attached to Ariana and missed her as much as she missed her daughter. Now Julia lives with Mickey and takes care of the children. The neighbors are already whispering that Mickey finally got married, and the new bride seems to be not bad. But Julia wasn't interested in a new relationship. She is still thinking day and night about how to take Eva back to her place. Meanwhile, Mickey was surprised to discover every day something new of a woman's real warmth and care for her family. It seemed to come so naturally to Julia. She easily found a common language with Mickey's children. She knew how to persuade them and pick up the right words. She enjoyed cooking delicious meals and was masterful at getting them ready to go out. In addition, Mickey had long ago noticed that Julia was quite good-looking. It was true that lately she had neglected her appearance a little, but Mickey had a clear idea of how stunning she would look if she gave herself some money and time. He decided to give her that treat. The following weekend, he gave Julia a certain amount of money and urged her to spend it on herself. Julia did so. In the evening, she returned home a refreshed young girl with a twinkle in her eye. Mickey realized that he could now gradually make steps toward winning Julia's favor, but he was very worried that his initiative to enter into a relationship might offend her. She had recently gone through a difficult breakup and was pining madly for her daughter. One night, when the children had gone to bed, Julia was talking about her daughter and showed Mickey a long ago family photo. Mickey looked at the photo and was literally stunned. "So this is your ex-husband?" Mickey asked. "Do you know him?" Julia asked. A pleasant smile appeared on Mickey's face. "That's John. He studied finance and worked in a trading company while he was still a student, and he was also boxing at the time, going to a gym in the old Arbat neighborhood. Am I right?" Mickey asked. "That's right. That's when he and I first met and dated," Julia said. "Now give me his phone number," Mickey said. Julia dictated his phone number. Mickey wrote it down and said, "I can't promise you anything, but I'll try my best to talk to him." Julia didn't pay much attention to Mickey's words. What could he do from a distance? This matter can only be settled through the courts, she thought. Julia was preparing breakfast for the children when the doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole and saw a strange woman at the door. Julia opened the door. "Hello, who do you want?" Julia asked. "And good luck to you. And who are you?" The woman, who smelled a pungent odor of booze, looked indignantly at me. At this point, Mickey heard extraneous conversations and went to the door. The unfamiliar woman saw Mickey and immediately turned to attacking him. "Mickey, how could you let a strange woman into your house? Where are our children? The children need their own mother, not some strange woman. I want to see my children." A drunken Casey demanded to see her long-forgotten children in high tones. Despite Mickey's attempts to calm her down and send her back, she managed to make her way into the hallway of the apartment. Barely on her feet, Casey called her children by name, but Frederick and Ariana only looked out of their rooms and back shut themselves in there. Mickey managed to get Casey out with great difficulty. During this time, Julia managed to find out that the man for whom Casey left her children and her family had abandoned her long ago. Casey now has nowhere to live and no job. It was an amazing coincidence that it was during such a period that she remembered her children. However, there was still more to come. Casey now began to visit Mickey and Julia almost every day. The children absolutely refused to see the woman. They didn't even seem to remember her. But Casey continued to demand that Julie get out of here and vacate her apartment immediately. Attempts to peacefully negotiate and resolve the matter were unsuccessful. At one point, Julia felt genuinely sorry for Casey as a woman, but it was useless to talk to her about it. Then Julia decided to try a somewhat unconventional approach to solving the problem. From the family album, she took out some good photos of Casey and posted them on a dating site. There were quite a few offers. Julia carefully selected each of them to find a more or less suitable match for Casey. Julia honestly told all the men that she was looking for an easygoing man for her friend. From the candidate, she demanded serious intentions, a job and a great desire to meet a girl with whom you can live your life without much worry. And there were quite a few of them. Julia gave Casey's phone number to a few selected candidates and strictly warned that the bride did not know about the dating site and the efforts of her mysterious friend. For potential candidates, it did not prove to be a problem. After 3 days, Mickey's apartment was quiet. There was no more banging on the door or drunken debauches on the landing. Julia realized that it was likely that one of the potential candidates had found a way to approach Casey. But Mickey didn't know the whole story and was worried sick trying to think of a solution to Casey's attacks. Julia left him alone with these worries so as not to seem too resourceful. On one of the usual days towards evening, Mickey called Julia and asked her to come home early. He promised that there would be a surprise waiting for her at home. Julia thought that surely Mickey must have bought something or wanted to give her money for shopping and salons again. What was her surprise when, after coming home from work, she opened the door to Mickey's apartment and saw her Eve in the living room. She couldn't believe her eyes. It turned out that Eva had missed her mom a lot too. They were sitting in each other's arms right on the floor and couldn't get enough of each other. Only then did Julia become curious as to how Mickey had managed to get her daughter. Mickey only smiled enigmatically and promised to tell her everything at the family dinner. I was walking home from practice one day and noticed that in the darkness behind the garages 2 big guys were beating up one guy. The victim was almost unconscious. He had no strength left to resist or beg for mercy. The bullies were beating him brutally. I decided to stand up for this guy. I managed to quickly calm the 2 men down so that they ran away in the darkness, blazing their heels. The guy had already lost a lot of blood and was lying half dead, so I took him to the hospital, and a couple days later he came to. By that time, even his parents had arrived. I visited him a couple times, just for humanity's sake. Then his parents thanked me immensely and offered to ask me anything I wanted from them. Like an honorable man, I didn't ask for anything and just disappeared from these people's lives. But I do remember John's face. After I was discharged from the hospital, he found me and bought me a couple of beers. That was the end of our acquaintance. So the other day, I called his parents and reminded them of the thanks they wanted to give me years ago. I told them the truth and asked them to give Eva away. So today, John brought Eve himself. I promised the Weasleys that I myself would personally take care of their granddaughter as my daughter. Eve will be a sister to Ariana. All that's left is to get you to agree, Mickey told Julie. Julia thought for a moment that everything was happening as if in a dream. When Ariana and Eva hugged her from both sides, she realized that this was not a dream, but the real life she deserved. If I understand correctly, did you just propose to me? Julia turned to Mickey. Mickey only smiled back. Well, then I mean to consult with the people who are important to me, Julia said. Then she turned to the children and asked, Frederick, Ariana, and Eva, are you ready to be brothers and sisters to each other and call Mickey and me Mom and Dad? Asked Julia. Yes, the children answered with glee. If the most important people say yes, how can I say no? Then I'll say yes too, Julia said. A couple of weeks later, Mickey and Julia were officially married. There were no more marital problems along the way. Maybe it was because they had paid a high price for happiness in advance.